poisoning
after President Trump announced strikes would be used to
Iran, partial
Republic of Congo.
Hurricane Michael, it's been pummeling that Florida.
For rapid withdrawal of
Indonesia, the death toll continuing to
North Korea
rise
and
Please welcome the founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies, Michael R. Bloomberg.
Well, good morning, everyone. Another round of applause for our dancers from the Streb Extreme Action conceived by the award-winning choreographer and recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant, Elizabeth Streb. Weren't they great? Now, I was actually invited to join that dance performance, but we do have a full morning ahead of us, and I figured I should save my energy. Seriously, the theme that drives today's forum is instability in the economy and in the environment. The dance performance we saw was inspired by just that theme, and I think it really was a powerful way to start the morning. So let me welcome everyone to the Global Business Forum. We have an outstanding group here at our New York conference with heads of state from over 50 countries and CEOs from a broad range of industries. And I want to give a special thanks to the international partners who helped bring us all together. They are listed on the screens around the room. And I want to thank all of you for making time to be here during this busy week. The United Nations General Assembly is in session, and we all know how busy traffic and everything else is during UNGA Week. In a sense, this forum has become the economic complement to UNGA Week, which is focused on geopolitics. But more and more, political issues require geoeconomic thinking and solutions. And let me just mention one example, and it is an issue that frames much of what we're going to talk about today, and that is climate change. Now, I know many of the heads of state here attended the UN Climate Summit on Monday. I addressed the summit in my role as Secretary General's Special Envoy for Climate Action, and one of the messages that I delivered was this: if we're going to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we have to move entirely off fossil fuels and to an economy powered by 100% clean energy. A decade ago, that seemed like a far-off fantasy, but smart government policies, combined with private sector innovation, have driven down the costs of clean energy faster than almost anyone thought was possible. Today, electricity from solar and wind is cheaper than coal-powered in a growing majority of the world, even without subsidies from other government support. And that's why this April, the U.S. generated more electricity from renewable sources than from coal for the very first time. And last year, global investments in renewable energy were triple what they were in gas and coal. That wouldn't have been possible without cooperation between the public and private sectors. Now, we still have a long ways to go, and we don't have any time to waste. But we've only scratched the surface of what we can achieve when government and business leaders work together on climate change, and that's the big focus of today. This morning, there will be two panel discussions featuring public officials and private sector members of the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative. It was an effort we created at the request of the UN Secretary General to help reach the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And last week, our group released a report outlining how to speed and scale up investment to transition away from fossil fuels. This morning, we announced a new public-private partnership to bring more climate finance to emerging markets. And I want to thank the partners in this coalition, all of whom are represented here today: Aliza Global Investors, AXA, NL, Goldman Sachs, Japan's Government Pension Investment Fund, HSBC, and Macquarie. All of us can help fight climate change, and we took a number of steps to make this New York conference sustainable. Everything from the signage to the carpets that you're standing on will be recycled, and we're composting as much as possible, including coffee cups. Of course, climate change isn't the only challenge we face. Populism and protectionism are injecting uncertainty into the global economy. Trade wars are harming businesses and consumers, and geopolitical risks represent a real and growing threat to people's livelihoods. So today is a chance for influential leaders to share ideas and have conversations that might not happen otherwise. We won't agree on every subject, but in a world that's increasingly polarized, it's critical that leaders in the public and private sectors talk to one another and listen even when we disagree. That's the only ways we're going to be able to solve problems, increase prosperity, and spread the benefits of growth more broadly. So I want to thank all of you again for being here. Now, our first speaker is the leader of one of the world's largest and most dynamic economies, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. We know this is an extremely busy week for the Prime Minister, so we are grateful that he has joined us. And I think he does have a lot to say about how important this audience is, that he has made time to be here. India's economic growth is one of the great success stories of the century. I've gotten to see that growth firsthand and the challenges it brings during visits to India. And Bloomberg Philanthropies has worked with the Prime Minister and partners in India to tackle some of those challenges. And let me give you just a few examples. We've supported the Prime Minister's Smart Cities initiative to make Indian cities greener and more connected. And we've collaborated with Indian cities that are taking bold action to fight climate change. We're working to support his administration's National Clean Air Program to reduce air pollution throughout India. We've supported India's work on making roads safer for everyone, and the Prime Minister deserves a lot of credit for the new National Road Safety Bill that he just signed into law, which will save an enormous number of lives. So I want to congratulate the Prime Minister for taking strong action to protect people from e-cigarettes, which our foundation is also working on here in the United States. The Prime Minister has set ambitious goals for India's future and how to reach them. And I'm glad to announce 2 new partnerships with Bloomberg that will lead in India. First, Bloomberg will help India navigate the process for gaining inclusion in global market benchmark indices so that international investors can access India's bond market. That will help Indian businesses raise funds to invest and grow. And it will help India's government raise funding for infrastructure and public service. Second, Bloomberg will support the development of the international financial services sector at Gujarat International Finance Tech City, also known as GIFT, or the Gift City. Gift City was envisioned by Prime Minister Modi as a 21st century digital connected international financial center and engine for new jobs. To help realize that vision, Bloomberg will host a series of roundtables in India, Asia, and beyond with investors from across the world, and will highlight opportunities for governments and businesses to work together and to bring new investment to Gift City. We hope this forum will spur more partnerships like these. We're looking forward to seeing what we can accomplish together in India, and we're glad to have the Prime Minister, someone that I have gotten to know very well over the years, here with us this morning to share his thoughts about India's future. I hope the Prime Minister enjoyed the dance performance you saw a little earlier. You might say that that was our version of Howdy Modi. Please welcome Prime Minister Modi.
Namaste, Mr. Michael Bloomberg,
Mr. Michael Bloomberg,
distinguished guests,
friends,
global businesses
global
और
businesses.
इकोनॉमी और उसका नर्व सेंटर
I am very
यानी
pleased
न्यूयॉर्क
to be here among all
और न्यूयॉर्क में आप
the
सभी दिग्गजों के बीच
industry
आना
in New York, the nerve
मेरे लिए
center of global business
हर्ष का
and
विषय है।
economy.
ब्लूमबर्ग ग्लोबल बिजनेस फोरम ने
The
मुझे
Bloomberg Global Business Forum
भारत की भावनाओं
has given me
और
an
संभावनाओं
opportunity
पर
to speak to you about
भारत की
India's
अपेक्षाओं
sentiments and
और
opportunities,
उम्मीदों पर
India's expectations and
भारत की
hopes,
ग्रोथ स्टोरी
India's growth story,
और भारत के फ्यूचर
and,
डायरेक्शन पर
India's future direction.
अपनी बात रखने के लिए अवसर दिया, इसके लिए मैं
I am
उनका
very,
बहुत
very
बहुत
grateful to
आभारी हूँ।
you for this opportunity.
साथियों,
Friends,
आज आप भारत में
today
फिर उस
you
सरकार
have
को देख रहे
once
हैं
again the
जो अपने
government
5
in
साल के
India
काम को लेकर
that went to the people,
जनता के बीच
presenting
गई
the work it had done for
और
5
पहले
years,
से ज्यादा
and came
संख्या
back
लेकर के
with an even
जनता
greater
ने फिर से उसको
majority than the
सेवा का
last
अवसर
time,
दिया।
and the government has given, the people
आप
have given
लोग
us an opportunity to serve them
अपनी
once
बातचीत
again.
में
In your discussions,
अक्सर
you often
बिजनेस सेंटिमेंट की बात करते हैं।
speak about business sentiment.
इस चुनाव में
During these elections,
130 करोड़ भारतीयों ने
1.3 billion Indians
अपना सेंटिमेंट ही नहीं जताया,
not only expressed
बल्कि
their sentiment,
जजमेंट भी दिया
but
है
gave a
कि
judgment
विकास
as
ही
well that
उनकी सबसे बड़ी
development
प्राथमिकता है।
was their only and
और
biggest
यहाँ बैठे
priority.
बिजनेस लीडर समझ
And the
सकते हैं
business leaders present
कि
here
विकास
today
के
can
पक्ष में यह सबल
understand
मैंडेट
that this very
वास्तव
strong
में
mandate in favor
भारत
of
में नए
development
अवसरों को
is in
का एक प्रकार से
reality
ऐलान है।
an announcement of the new opportunities being created in India.
भारत की जनता
Today, the people of
उस
India
सरकार के साथ खड़ी है
support a
जो
government
बिजनेस एनवायरनमेंट
that
सुधारने
does
के
not
लिए
hesitate to take
बड़े से बड़े
the biggest and
और
most
कड़े से
harsh
कड़े फैसले
decisions
लेने में
in order to
पीछे
improve
नहीं
the
रहती।
business environment.
आज भारत में
Today,
एक
there
ऐसी
is
सरकार
a
है
government in India
जो बिजनेस वर्ल्ड का
that
सम्मान करती है,
respects the business world,
वेल्थ
that
क्रिएशन का सम्मान
respects
करती
the
है।
creation of wealth.
साथियों,
Friends,
आपकी जानकारी में होगा
you perhaps know
कि अभी कुछ दिन पहले ही
that
हमने
just recently we
कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स
have
में भारी
decided
कमी करने का
to
फैसला लिया है।
considerably reduce corporate
ये
tax.
निवेश के स्तर से बहुत
This
क्रांतिकारी
is
कदम
a
है
very
और
revolutionary
इस फैसले
step
के बाद
for attracting
मेरी
investment.
बिजनेस वर्ल्ड
And
में के
after
जितने भी लोगों
we
से बात
took
हुई,
this decision, all those
जिनसे
that
भी
I have
मुलाकात
had a
हुई,
chance to meet
वो इसे
from the business world or
बहुत ही
speak to from the
ऐतिहासिक कदम
business
मानते
world,
हैं।
they all consider
दौरान
this a very
निवेश
historic
बढ़ाने
step.
के लिए
At the same time,
एक के बाद
to
एक
increase
कई
investments,
फैसलों का
the
ऐलान
government has announced
सरकार द्वारा किया गया
several
है।
successive decisions.
हमने
We have
नई सरकार बनने के
also
बाद
done
अभी-अभी
away, very recently,
50
just
से
after the
ज्यादा
formation
ऐसे
of the
पुराने
new
कानूनों को
government,
भी समाप्त कर
done
दिया
away
है
with 50 old
जो विकास
laws
के कार्यों में
that were
बाधा
obstacles
उत्पन्न कर रहे
for
हैं।
development.
मैं आपको फिर याद
I
दिला
would
दूं,
like to remind
हमारी
you
नई सरकार
once
को अभी
again that our new
3-4
government
महीने से ज्यादा
has
समय नहीं
not
हुआ
been
है।
in office for more than 3 or 4
आज इस मंच
months.
से
Today, I
मैं
would
कहना
like to
चाहता
say
हूं,
to all of you
ये तो
at this forum
अभी
that
शुरुआत
this
है।
is just a beginning.
अभी लंबा समय आगे
There
बाकी है।
is there's still
इस
a long
सफर
way
में
to go. It is
भारत के साथ
a
पार्टनरशिप करने के
golden
लिए
opportunity
ये
for
पूरे
the
विश्व के बिजनेस वर्ल्ड के लिए
to form
सुनहरा
partnerships
मौका है,
with
golden
India
opportunity है।
to accompany
Friends,
it on this journey.
Today,
Friends,
India
today
is in a unique position
India is in a unique
where our
position
rapid growth
where our
enables
rapid
us
growth enables
to
us
cater
to cater
to
to
diverse demand.
demands.
Our people
Our
are
people
rapidly,
are rapidly
defeating poverty,
defeating poverty,
moving up the economic
moving up
ladder
the economic ladder,
with increasing purchasing
and
power.
with increasing purchasing power.
Thus,
Thus,
if you want to
if you
invest
want
in a
to
market
invest
where
in
there
a
is a
market where
scale,
there is scale,
come to India.
come to India.
Our middle class is a huge segment,
It's a huge segment of people
who are aspirational and has a global outlook. Thus, if you want to invest in a market where the latest trend and futures are appreciated, come to India. Our youth are one of the largest users of the app economy. From food to transport, and from movies to hyper-local delivery, startups are acing everything. Thus, if you want to invest in startups with a huge market, come to India. Our infrastructure creation is expanding at a fast pace, from highways to metros, from railways to ports, from airports to logistics. Each sector is seeing massive investment and tremendous potential. Thus, If you want to invest in one of the world's largest infrastructure ecosystem, come to India. We are rapidly modernizing our cities and equipping them with latest technology and citizen-friendly infrastructure. Thus, if you want to invest in urbanization, come to India. We have opened our defense sector like never before. If you want to make in India, for India, and for the world, come to India. We are building tens of millions of homes for the poor and middle classes. This is perhaps the largest housing efforts in the world. Thus, to invest in reality, come to India. साथियों, भारत में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के विकास पर आज जितना हमारी सरकार निवेश कर रही है, उतना पहले कभी नहीं किया गया। अब हम आने वाले वर्षों में 100 लाख करोड़ यानी लगभग 1.3 ट्रिलियन डॉलर आधुनिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर खर्च करने जा रहे हैं। इसके अलावा भारत के सोशल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर भी लाखों करोड़ रुपए खर्च किए जा रहे हैं। भारत की ग्रोथ स्टोरी में क्वालिटेटिव और क्वांटिटेटिव लीप का रोड मैप जमीन पर उतर चुका है। अब भारत ने एक बड़ा लक्ष्य रखा है, देश को $5 ट्रिलियन की इकोनॉमी बनाने। साथियों, जब 2014 में हम सरकार में आए थे, तो देश की इकोनॉमी करीब करीब $2 ट्रिलियन के आसपास थी। बीते 5 वर्षों में हमने इसमें लगभग $1 ट्रिलियन जोड़ दिया और अब हम कमर कसकर $5 ट्रिलियन के लक्ष्य को प्राप्त करने के लिए काम कर रहे हैं। फ्रेंड्स, इस बड़े टारगेट को अचीव करने के लिए हमारे पास कैपेबिलिटी भी है, करेज भी है और कंडीशंस भी हमारे साथ है। आज भारत की ग्रोथ स्टोरी के 4 अहम फैक्टर हैं जो एक साथ दुनिया में मिलने वाली शायद ये रेयरेस्ट ऑफ द रेयर कॉम्बिनेशन है। ये 4 फैक्टर हैं: डेमोक्रेसी, डेमोग्राफी, डिमांड एंड डिसिसिवनेस। अगर मैं पहले फैक्टर की बात करूं, तो भारत में ऐसा मौका, ऐसी पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी कई दशकों के बाद आई है। जब डेमोक्रेसी हो, पॉलिटिकल स्टेबिलिटी हो, पॉलिसी प्रेडिक्टेबल हो, जुडिशरी इंडिपेंडेंट हो, तो इन्वेस्टमेंट की सेफ्टी, सिक्योरिटी और ग्रोथ का भरोसा अपने आप मिलता है। फ्रेंड्स, इस ग्रोथ को बल मिलता है भारत के डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड से, यंग और एनर्जेटिक टैलेंट पूल से। भारत आज दुनिया के सबसे बड़े इंजीनियरिंग एजुकेशन बेस और सबसे मजबूत R&D फैसिलिटीज वाले देशों में से एक है। इनोवेशन को लेकर जो एनकरेजमेंट भारत के युवाओं को मिल रहा है, उसके कारण अमेरिका और चीन के बाद भारत यूनिकॉर्न्स के मामले में तीसरे नंबर पे है, 3rd नंबर पे है। फ्रेंड्स, तीसरा डिमांड का फैक्टर है। जैसे जैसे भारत की बड़ी आबादी इकोनॉमिकली एम्पावर्ड हो रही है, परचेजिंग पावर बढ़ रही है, वैसे वैसे डिमांड भी बढ़ रही है। उदाहरण के लिए, पिछले कुछ वर्षों से एयर पैसेंजर ट्रैफिक की ग्रोथ
of air passenger traffic
डबल डिजिट में
has
है,
been in double digits.
जिसके चलते
As a result,
आज भारत
today,
दुनिया का
India is
तीसरा
the
बड़ा
world's third largest
एविएशन मार्केट बन
aviation
चुका है।
market.
फ्रेंड्स,
Friends,
डेमोक्रेसी,
along with democracy,
डेमोग्राफी
demography,
और डिमांड के
demand.
साथ ही आज जो बात
the factor
भारत को
that
विशेष
makes
बनाती है
India special
वो है
is
डिसिसिवनेस।
decisiveness.
एक डाइवर्स और
Despite
फेडरल
being
डेमोक्रेसी
a
होने के
diverse
बावजूद
and federal democracy,
बीते 5 वर्ष
in the
में
last 5 years,
पूरे
we
भारत के
have
लिए
focused on
सीमलेस,
preparing
इंक्लूसिव और
seamless
ट्रांसपेरेंट व्यवस्थाएं
and
तैयार करने
inclusive
पर
mechanisms
बल
and
दिया गया।
transparent mechanisms
जहां
for
पहले
all of
भारत में
India,
टैक्स का जाल
where
था,
there was a complex web of
वहीं
taxes
अब
in India, today
जीएसटी के रूप
we
में
have
एक ही
a single
इनडायरेक्ट
tax
टैक्स रिजीम
regime, a
पूरे
single
देश के
indirect
बिजनेस
tax
कल्चर
regime
का
in the form
हिस्सा
of
बन
the
चुकी है।
GST, and this has become an
IPR
integral part of
एवं
the
ट्रेडमार्क
business
की
culture
रिजीम
of
को
the
मजबूत
entire
बनाने के
country.
लिए ही
We have done
हमने
considerable
काफी काम
amounts
किया है।
of work to strengthen
इसी तरह
the IPR and trademark
इंसॉल्वेंसी
regime.
और
Similarly,
बैंकरप्सी से
in
निपटने के
order
लिए
to deal with insolvency
इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बैंकरप्सी कोड
we
बनाया।
formulated the insolvency and
टैक्स से
bankruptcy
जुड़े
code.
कानूनों
We
और इक्विटी इन्वेस्टमेंट पर
will
टैक्स को
continue
ग्लोबल
to
टैक्स
make
रिजीम के
necessary
बराबर लाने के
reforms
लिए
on a regular
हम
basis
जरूरी
in
सुधार
order to align
निरंतर करते
tax-related
रहेंगे।
regulations and
टैक्स
tax and
रिफॉर्म्स
equity
के अलावा
investments with the global
दुनिया
tax
का
regime.
सबसे बड़ा फाइनेंशियल
Apart
इंक्लूजन
from
में
tax
भारत में
reforms, the
बहुत
world's
कम
largest
समय में
financial
हुआ।
inclusion was done in
करीब
India in a very short time.
370 मिलियन
Approximately
लोगों को 370 मिलियन लोगों को
370 million people
बीते 4-5 साल में
have been made
बैंकिंग से
part
पहली बार
of
जोड़ा
the
गया है।
banking system for
आज
the
भारत
first
के
time,
करीब-करीब
and this was done
हर
in the last
नागरिक
4 or 5
नागरिक के
years.
पास
Today,
यूनिक
almost
आईडी
every
है,
citizen of India
मोबाइल
has a
फोन और
unique
बैंक अकाउंट है,
identification ID,
जिसके
a
कारण
mobile phone and a bank
टारगेटेड
account.
सर्विस डिलीवरी
And
में
these have
तेजी आई,
resulted in faster delivery
लीकेज
of
बंद
targeted
हुई
services. It
और
has helped in
ट्रांसपेरेंसी
prevention of
कई
leakage
गुना बढ़ी
and
है।
has increased
फ्रेंड्स,
transparency many times
न्यू इंडिया
over.
में हमने
Friends,
डीरेगुलेशन,
in India, we have started
डी
a
लाइसेंसिंग
sort of a
और
campaign
de-bottlenecking
of
की मुहिम चलाई
deregulation, de-licensing
ऐसे
and
ही
de-bottlenecking.
रिफॉर्म्स के
And
कारण
it is due to these
हर
reforms
ग्लोबल
that
रैंकिंग में
India has
भारत
been performing
निरंतर
better
बेहतर
in all
प्रदर्शन
global
करता जा रहा है।
rankings.
लॉजिस्टिक परफॉर्मेंस
Logistics
इंडेक्स में
Performance Index ranking
10 रैंक का
jumped
जंप,
up 10 places.
ग्लोबल कॉम्पिटिटिवनेस इंडेक्स
Global
में
Competitive Index ranking
13 अंक
took
का उछाल,
a leap of 13
ग्लोबल
places.
इनोवेशन इंडेक्स में
Global Innovation
24
Index
नंबर का
ranking
सुधार
improved
और
by
सबसे
24
अहम
places,
वर्ल्ड
and most
बैंक
importantly,
ईज ऑफ डूइंग
in the
बिजनेस
World
इंडेक्स
Bank's
में
Ease of Doing Business
65
Index,
रैंक का
our
सुधार
improvement in
अभूतपूर्व
rank
है,
of 65
असाधारण।
places is unprecedented,
और
it's
साथियों,
extraordinary.
आप सभी
And friends, you
ये
all
भी
know
भली
very
भांति
well
जानते हैं कि ये
that
रैंकिंग
these rankings
ऐसे ही नहीं
don't
सुधरती।
improve just like that.
हमने बिल्कुल
We
ग्राउंड लेवल
have
पर
made
जाकर
improvements at
व्यवस्थाओं
the
में
ground
सुधार
level
किया है,
and
नियमों को
simplified
आसान बनाया
our
है।
rules.
मैं आपको एक उदाहरण देता
I
हूं।
will give you another example.
पहले बिजली
Earlier,
कनेक्शन लेने के लिए
It would take years
उद्योगों को
for an industrial
कई
unit
साल लग
to
जाते
get
थे।
a power connection.
अब
And
कुछ दिनों
now
के भीतर
it takes
बिजली
only a
कनेक्शन
few
मिलने
days
लगा है।
to get a
इसी
new
तरह
power connection.
कंपनी
Similarly,
रजिस्ट्रेशन
earlier
करने
it
में
would
पहले
take
कई हफ्ते
several
लग
weeks
जाते
to
थे,
register a
अब
company.
कुछ ही घंटों में
Now, company
कंपनी
registration can be
रजिस्ट्रेशन हो
done
जाता है।
in just a few hours.
बीते 5 वर्ष में
I will give you
क्या
another
परिवर्तन
example
आया,
of the kind of changes
इसका एक
that have
उदाहरण
occurred in
मैं
the
आपको
last
देता
5
हूं।
years.
बीते 5
In the
सालों
last
में
5
भारत
years,
में 286 बिलियन एफडीआई
we
हुआ है।
have seen foreign direct
ये बीते
investment in India of
20 साल में
286
भारत के
billion
टोटल
dollars.
एफडीआई
This
फ्लो
is
का
half of the
आधा
total
है,
FDI
50%
inflow into
है।
India in the
अमेरिका ने
previous
भी
20 years. Even the
जितना
investment that
एफडीआई
America has
बीते
done in
दशकों में
India
भारत में किया
in the
है,
previous decades,
उसका 50%
of
सिर्फ
that
पिछले 4 साल में
investment
हुआ है।
has been done only
और
in
ये
the last
तब
4
है
years, and
जब
that
पूरी
too at a
दुनिया
time
में
when the world
FDI
over,
inflow
FDI
level
inflow levels
लगातार कम
have
हो
been
रहा है।
decreasing continuously.
इसमें भी एक
In
और
this
इंटरेस्टिंग
also,
बात ये
there
है
is another
कि
interesting
करीब
fact.
90%
Around
FDI
90% of this investment
ऑटोमेटिक
has
रूट से
been
हुआ
done
है
by the FDI
और
automatic route,
40%
and 40%
ग्रीनफील्ड
is
इन्वेस्टमेंट है।
greenfield investment.
यदि आज इन्वेस्टर का भारत पर भरोसा बढ़ा है
If the
और वो लंबे
confidence
समय
of
के लिए आ
investors
रहा
has
है।
grown in India and are
Friends,
coming in for a long
Bloomberg
time,
की
this
अपनी
is what
रिपोर्ट
it
में
means.
भी
In fact, friends,
भारत में
Bloomberg's
आ
own
रहे बदलाव
report
की
bears
गवाह
testimony to the changes happening in India.
ब्लूमबर्ग के
In the Bloomberg
नेशन ब्रांड
Nation
ट्रैकर
Brand
2018
Tracker
सर्वे में
2018
भारत को
survey,
इन्वेस्टमेंट के
India
लिहाज
has
से
been ranked
एशिया में पहला नंबर दिया
number
गया
1
है।
in Asia for investment.
10 में से 7
In
इंडिकेटर्स
7 out of 10
पॉलिटिकल
indicators,
स्टेबिलिटी,
political stability,
करेंसी
currency
स्टेबिलिटी,
stability,
हाई क्वालिटी
high
प्रोडक्ट्स,
quality products,
एंटी करप्शन,
anti-corruption,
लो कॉस्ट ऑफ
low
प्रोडक्शन,
cost of
स्ट्रेटेजिक
production,
लोकेशन
strategic
और
location,
रिस्पेक्ट फॉर आईपीआर।
and respect for
इन
IPR.
सब में
In
भारत
all of
नंबर
these
1 पे रहा
parameters,
है।
India has been ranked number 1.
बाकी इंडिकेटर्स में
Even
भी
in the
हम
remaining
काफी ऊपर हैं।
indicators, India's position
Friends,
was among the higher ranking
Your
countries.
desires and
Friends,
our
your
dreams
desires and our dreams
match
match
perfect.
perfectly.
Your technology and our
Our
talent
talent,
can change the world.
the world,
Your scale
your scale
and our skills
and our skills
can speed up
can
global
speed up
economic
global
growth.
economic growth.
Your prudent method
Prudent method
and our pragmatic
and
mind
our pragmatic
can
mind
write
can
new
write
stories
new
in management.
in management.
Your rational ways and our human values can show the path which the world is looking for. And if there is any gap anywhere, I will personally act as a bridge. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I get it. Well, I know, Mr. Prime Minister, the audience is interested in a number of issues, but let's start with one that everybody cares about around the world, and that is climate change. You have set one of the most ambitious goals for generating renewable energy, and India is now providing wind and solar at some of the cheapest electricity rates in all of Asia. How did you accomplish that? And is India on the track to really meet the ambitious targets that you set?
मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूं कि
I
आपने
am very grateful to you.
विश्व के लिए जो सबसे
You
बड़ी
have
चिंता का
touched
विषय है
on a subject which is
उसको
very
स्पर्श
important
किया
for
है।
the entire world.
और मैं जानता हूं आप
And I
स्वयं
know
भी
that you yourself
इस विषय पर
are
कमिटेड हैं, आपका
very
एक commitment
committed
है, आपका
to this
conviction है।
subject. You have a lot of conviction
ये बात सही
about
है
what
कि
needs to be done. It
भारत
is
की जो
true
lifestyle है,
that the lifestyle in
वो
India,
दुनिया के लिए एक बहुत बड़ा उदाहरण है।
it is a very great example for the world.
हम लोग सिद्धांततः इस बात को
We
मानने वाले लोग हैं
are people that follow some principles
पृथ्वी
in this
हमारी
area.
माता
We
है।
believe that the earth is our
और
mother,
हमें
and
उसका
we need to,
एक्सप्लॉइटेशन करने का अधिकार
we
नहीं।
do not have the right to
हमें सिर्फ
exploit our
milking का
earth.
ही अधिकार
We
है, दोहन का।
only have the right to use it
भारत
for
मूलतः
our
उस चिंतन
needs.
से जुड़ा हुआ
So
है,
India has this
जहाँ
very fundamental
need
principle.
समझ सकते हैं,
We can
ग्रीड का कोई
we can
उपाय
understand
नहीं।
needs, but we
तो ये
do not
मूलभूत
want to
तत्वज्ञान
cater to people's
और मैं
greed.
मानता
This
हूं
is
कि
something
दुनिया
that
में
is a very fundamental principle of
global
ours, and I
warming के
believe
challenge
that
को
the challenge of global warming,
सरकारें बाकी व्यवस्थाओं से ज्यादा
there are
नागरिक की
governments,
behavior ही इस
etc., that are
परिस्थिति
working
से
on it,
दुनिया
but
को
to really be able to find a solution,
और
it is only
इसलिए
the behavior of citizens that can
human
make an
behavior
impact.
को
And therefore,
हमें
Human
नेचर के
behavior
साथ जोड़ करके
needs to be
चलने की
in
आदत बनानी
harmony
पड़ेगी।
with nature. We need to
दूसरी बात है,
go
भारत ने
forward keeping
तय किया
the
है,
environment in mind.
हमने पहले
And
लक्ष्य तय किया
India
था
has
175
also
गीगावाट
had initially set a
renewable energy
target
की
of
तरफ जाने का।
175
मुझे आज
gigawatts for
खुशी
the
है
production of renewable
कि
energy.
समय से बहुत
I am
आगे हम
today
चल
that
रहे हैं
we are well
और
ahead
करीब-करीब
of timelines to
120
deadlines to
गीगावाट
achieve
का
this
काम हमने
target. We
already
have
achieve कर
already
लिया है।
achieved
और कल
120
मैं जब UN में बोल
gigawatts.
रहा
And
था,
yesterday when I was
तो मैंने
speaking
अपने
at the
लिए एक नया
United
टारगेट
Nations,
तय
then I
किया है,
set a new target for
450
myself,
गीगावाट
450
और निकट
gigawatts.
भविष्य में
And in the very
हम
near future,
450
we
गीगावाट
want to increase
renewable energy के क्षेत्र
our
में जाएंगे।
renewable energy production to
इसको करने के लिए
450
हमने
gigawatts. In order to
एक
achieve
तो
this,
पॉलिसी इनिशिएटिव
we
लिए
have
हैं,
taken some policy
दूसरा
initiatives. And
incentives
secondly,
दिए हैं,
we have also given
तीसरा
incentives. Thirdly,
हमारी कोशिश है कि इसके
it
लिए
is our effort
जो आवश्यक संभावना है
that
उसको बल दिया जाए।
all the necessary
हमारे सामने एक चुनौती अभी भी
opportunities
है
we need to give
और वो
this
है
emphasis. One challenge
nuclear
that is
energy
before us today
क्योंकि
is
हम
that
एनर्जी
of
के मेंबर
nuclear
न होने के
energy,
कारण
because since we are not a
हमें जो
member
फ्यूल की
of
सप्लाई
the
की
nuclear
सुविधा रहनी
suppliers
चाहिए वो
group,
नहीं रहती
we
है।
do not really
अगर हमारा
have
वो
the
सॉल्यूशन हो जाता है
ability to
तो
get
शायद
fuel
हम
for
दुनिया
producing
में
nuclear
एक
energy. If we
मॉडल के
were
रूप
to
में
get
इस
that
क्षेत्र में काम कर
opportunity, we
सकते
could
हैं।
perhaps be a
लेकिन
model in
क्लाइमेट
this
के
area for the
विषय के
world.
साथ एक
But
दूसरा विषय
on
जुड़ा हुआ
with
है
respect to climate, there is
जिसकी
another
तरफ ध्यान
related
अभी
topic
गया नहीं है,
to
वो
which
है
we have
पानी,
not really
वाटर।
focused our attention
भारत
on
ने
it,
अभी
and that
जल जीवन
subject is
मिशन का एक
water.
बहुत बड़ा
In India, we
इनिशिएटिव
have
लिया
recently
है
taken an
और
initiative
हम
called Jal
रेन वाटर
Jeevan Mission
हार्वेस्टिंग,
for water. Basically, it
recycling,
focuses on
reuse,
rainwater
इन चीजों पर
harvesting,
बल दे करके पूरे देश में
reuse,
एक बहुत
recycling
बड़ा अभियान
of
चलाना
water. We
चाहते
are
हैं।
starting a
हम
very big
ये भी
campaign
चाहते
across the
हैं कि
country
हम
for this,
आवश्यकता के
and we
अनुसार
also
हमारी
want
नदियों को
to make
पुनर्जीवित
sure
करें,
that we
हमारे नदियों का ग्रिड कैसे
reinvigorate
करें
our
उस
rivers,
पर हम बढ़ें।
and we are trying to focus
हमने
on this
सिंगल
as
यूज
well.
प्लास्टिक को
We
प्रतिबंधित
have
किया है
also banned
और
the
देश
use
में
of
सिंगल यूज
single-use
प्लास्टिक
plastic,
को डिस्करेज
and
करने के लिए
we
एक बहुत बड़ा
are
मूवमेंट चलाया है।
starting a
ये
very
2
big
अक्टूबर
movement
को
to
महात्मा
stop the
गांधी की
use
जन्म
of
जयंती के
single-use
अवसर पर
plastic.
पूरे
And
देश
on
में
the 2nd
सिंगल
of
यूज प्लास्टिक के
October,
खिलाफ
on the
एक बहुत
occasion
बड़ी
of the
मुहिम
birth
हम
anniversary of
सफलतापूर्वक
Mahatma
करें।
Gandhi, we are
यानी
going to
हम
announce this very large campaign to end the
क्लाइमेट को
use of
लेकर के,
single-use
एनवायरनमेंट
plastic.
को लेकर के
So with respect to
अनेक
climate, with
क्षेत्रों
respect
पर
to the
एक साथ आगे बढ़
environment,
रहे
we want to adopt a holistic approach and move forward together.
You talked about plastic, water, renewables. Do you have any expectations of reducing the amount of coal that is burnt in India?
ये बात सही है कि
You're
दुनिया का
absolutely right
तीसरा
that
सबसे
the
ज्यादा
third largest
कोल रिजर्व भारत में है।
coal reserve is
भारत
in
जैसे गरीब
India.
देश में
A poor country like India,
उसको हम नकार नहीं
you
सकेंगे,
know, we
लेकिन
cannot
उसका
ignore
उपाय है।
it, but
एक
there is a solution to it.
माइनिंग
Number
की
one
पद्धति को
is
बदलना
that we will have to
और
change the ways of
माइनिंग करना
mining and
ताकि उसके कारण
to carry out underground
वे
mining so that
एनवायरनमेंट को नुकसान न करें।
they don't do
दूसरा
any
सबसे
damage
बड़ा
to the
अच्छा उपाय
environment.
है
The other
कोल
solution is
गैसिफिकेशन का।
coal
कोल
gasification.
गैसिफिकेशन
By
से
doing coal
क्लीन एनर्जी
gasification,
उपलब्ध होती
we
है
can
और
make
हम
use of
दुनिया
clean
को इनवाइट
energy,
करते हैं
and we
टेक्नोलॉजी
are
लेकर के आने की
inviting, we are
ताकि
calling
हम कोल
out to
गैसिफिकेशन
other
करके
countries
उस
to
गैस के
bring out
द्वारा
their technology so we can use coal gasification, you know, whether it can be used in mobility or in energy. We want to use gasified coal. So the assets that India has, we cannot deny them. At the same time, we want to see how we can use these assets in an environment-friendly way. That is what we are focusing on.
Let's change the subject and talk about the economy. India's economic growth is one of the great success stories of the century. Last month, you said that India could have a $5 trillion economy in 5 years. How do you plan to reach that target, and will it require additional economic reforms or steps to boost foreign investments?
मैं आपकी बात से सहमत हूं
I
कि
agree with you that
आज
today
दुनिया में कोई आइसोलेटेड एक्टिविटी नहीं कर सकता।
no one can do any isolated activity in the
हम
world today.
इंटरडिपेंडेंट era से गुजर रहे हैं.
We are in an era
हमने
where
global
we are
benchmarking से ही
interdependent.
चलना
We
है.
have
तो
to
पहला काम
adopt
है
global
मुझे
benchmarks.
मेरे
So the
कानून,
first task
नियम,
for me,
व्यवस्थाएं,
all
governance,
my laws,
efficiency,
my
ये सारी
regulations, my
चीजें
governance,
हमें global
efficiency,
benchmark
we
से जोड़नी
need to
पड़ेगी
be able to
ताकि
first of
दुनिया
all
को वो
adapt
सरलता भी रहे
global
और
benchmarks,
विश्वास भी पैदा
and so
हो.
that we will
तो
be able
उसके
to
लिए जो
increase the
कानूनों में सुधार
confidence
करना
of
चाहिए वो हम
investors.
कर
So
रहे
we
हैं.
are
कई
doing the
नए
necessary
initiative
reforms in our
दूसरा,
laws and taking some new
investors
initiatives
के
as
लिए
well.
safety.
Secondly, safety
उसको
and
उसका return
security
मिलना
of
चाहिए.
investors. Investors
और
must
मैं
get the
मानता हूँ भारत की
return
दो
they
चीजें
want on
दुनिया
their
से
investments, and there
हमें
are
अलग
two
करती हैं.
things in India
एक
that distinguish us from the rest of the world.
और दूसरी
One is
हमारी
democracy,
judicial
and the
system और वो भी
second is our
अंग्रेजी में.
judicial system, which is
उसके कारण
also
कोई
in
भी
English.
investor,
So any
अगर कोई
investor,
dispute का मामला
if there
बनता
is a
है,
dispute of
तो ये
any
दो
kind,
चीजें उसको confidence देती
these
हैं
two
कि democratic
factors
system है,
create confidence
perfect
for
judicial system
the
है,
investors.
और
There is a
अंग्रेजी
democratic
होने के
system,
कारण
there is a very
वो
good
interpretation के
judicial
problem नहीं होते
system,
हैं.
and there is
अमेरिका में
the
बैठा
use
हुआ
of the
व्यक्ति
English
या
language, so there
ब्रिटेन
are
में
no
बैठा हुआ
problems with
व्यक्ति
respect to
उसका
understanding
interpretation
and
वही करता है जो
interpretation,
हिंदुस्तान वाला
and
करता है. तो
there
language
is a
एक अपने आप में बहुत बड़ा
uniform
role कर रही है.
interpretation of
तो ये
laws, etc. So
given
language
situation
plays a
हमारे
very
अनुकूल
important
है.
role. So
दूसरा,
this situation
हम
is pretty
हमारे
favorable in
infrastructure
India.
को
Secondly,
next
we
generation
are
infrastructure
also
के लिए
trying
बनाना
to
चाहते हैं.
make our
हम नए airports
infrastructure
बनाना चाहते हैं.
ready for the
हम
next
नई railway
generation
line की
infrastructure.
speed
We
बढ़ाना
want to
चाहते
create
हैं.
new airports. We
हम
want to
electrification
increase the
करना
speed
चाहते
of
हैं.
railway lines.
हम
We
हमारे roads
want
को
to have
करना चाहते
electrification.
हैं.
We want
हम
better
हमारे हर
roads.
परिवार को
And we want to give
घर देना चाहते
every
हैं.
family a
यानी
home.
एक प्रकार से
So
infrastructure एक हमारी priority
infrastructure
sector है.
is a priority
दूसरा है
sector
value
for
addition.
us. The second area
Agriculture
is
sector
value
में हम
addition.
बहुत बड़ी
In the
मात्रा में,
agricultural sector,
food processing की तरफ
we
जाना चाहते
want to
हैं.
go towards
और
food
हम
processing in a
भारत
big
अगर
way.
कोशिश करें
And if
तो
India
एक प्रकार
makes
से food
efforts,
basket बन सकता
we
है.
can become a food
हम
basket.
organic farming की तरफ
We
बल देना
also want
चाहते
to
हैं.
promote
उसके
organic
कारण
farming. And for this
दुनिया का एक जो
reason,
बहुत बड़ा मार्केट holistic health
the
care का
very
है,
big market
उसके लिए
that
हम
exists in
अनेक
the world
व्यवस्था
for
कर सकते हैं.
holistic
भारत में
healthcare, we
health sector
can
में बहुत
contribute to
सुविधाएं
it.
हैं.
There are a lot of
हमने
good
अभी
health facilities in India.
दुनिया की
Only
सबसे बड़ी
recently,
health insurance scheme शुरू
we
की.
have started the biggest health insurance
अमेरिका,
scheme in
कनाडा
India.
और मेक्सिको.
America, Canada, and
उसकी जो
Mexico.
total population है,
If you look at the total
उससे
population
ज्यादा
of these
लोगों
three
को
countries, we
हम भारत में
provide
आयुष्मान भारत के तहत हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस दे
health
रहे हैं.
insurance
इसका
to
मतलब कि मुझे
more
मेरे
people
देश
than
में
that under the
2000 नए
Ayushman
आधुनिक
Bharat
हॉस्पिटल
scheme.
के
So
इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर
we
की
need to
और हॉस्पिटल निर्माण की
build
संभावनाएं पैदा हुई
2,000
हैं,
more
जिसमें रेस्ट
hospitals
एश्योर्ड इनकम
so that
क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट
there is
पेमेंट देने
this is
वाली
an
है.
assured
तो अपने
income
आप
for
में
these
हेल्थ सेक्टर
hospitals
में भी
because the
बहुत
government
बड़ी
is going to
सुविधा
pay
है.
them because
तो
of the health
इन्वेस्टमेंट
insurance
के लिए
scheme. And
इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर
so
हो, क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ
whether
की
it is
बात
the
हो,
quality of
हम
life,
डिजिटल इंडिया की ओर जा रहे
we
हैं.
are going towards a digital
हमारे
India.
यहाँ
And
600,000 विलेजेज में ऑप्टिकल फाइबर नेटवर्क और डिजिटल इंडिया की मेरी मूवमेंट ये भी
We are
इन्वेस्टमेंट की
looking at an
संभावना
optical fiber
वाला है.
network for
हम स्टार्टअप को बहुत बढ़ावा
600,000
दे रहे
villages,
हैं.
and we are
आज
actually
हम
promoting
स्टार्टअप
startups a
इकोसिस्टम में
lot.
नंबर 3 पे
We are
हैं,
number
लेकिन
3
हम
at the
तो और
startup
आगे बढ़ाना
ecosystem,
चाहते
but we
हैं.
want to
तो मैं
improve
समझता हूँ
our
यूथ के लिए भी
environment. So I think
बहुत
even
सारी
for the
संभावना है.
youth, there
ये
is a lot
सारे
of
जो हमारे
possibilities in
इनिशिएटिव
India.
हैं,
In fact, we've
उस
taken so
इनिशिएटिव का
many
परिणाम है
initiatives,
कि
and the
हमारी
result of
इकोनॉमी
these
बहुत तेजी
initiatives
से
is
बढ़ी
that our
और हमारा
economy
5
will
साल का
grow at a
अनुभव
fast
है
pace.
कि
And
हम
in the
2 से
5
3-5 साल में
years,
चले गए.
we
तो 5
have
जाना
noticed that,
मुझे
you
जरा
know,
भी कठिन नहीं
we
लगता है. और
from
हम
2
बहुत
trillion
निश्चित
to be
समय
made
में
it
5
to a
भी
3
पहुंच
trillion
जाएंगे.
economy, and I'm very sure that we will be able to achieve the $5 trillion target.
In spite of all of the new technology that keeps getting introduced around the world, the real key to economic growth is still the workforce. And you have a very young workforce. Half the population is under the age of 25. And that presents real challenges in terms of skill sets and job education. Especially as the economy around the world rewards more education and high-skilled workers. How is your administration going to tackle education changes in technology, and how can the private sector really help you get it done?
बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय को
I think you have actually touched upon a very important subject. Our biggest dividend is the young talent. It's a big advantage for India. We are, as I mentioned, putting a lot of emphasis on innovation. From the primary school level, there is a new network that we have established called the Atal Tinkerer Lab. We want to promote innovation. We are also trying to set up a network of incubation centers so that, you know, the world is never going to to
नए नए
stop.
आविष्कारों के
The
साथ
world
और
will keep coming
शायद
with new
पिछले 300
inventions
साल
and new
में जितने
technologies.
आविष्कार
I
हुए
think the
होंगे
kind of
उससे
inventions that
ज़्यादा
have happened in the
पिछले
last
60 साल
300
में
years,
होंगे
more than
और आने
that,
वाले दिनों में
inventions have
शायद
happened
उससे
in the
भी
last
ज़्यादा
60
तेजी
years.
से
So
होने वाले
I think in the
तो
future we
उसके
can
लिए
expect an
ground
even
तैयार
faster
करना और
pace
talent
of
का उपयोग
inventions and
requirement के
innovations.
अनुसार
So I
करना
think we need
तो
to
एक तो हम
prepare a
human resource
groundwork
को
for this
develop
kind
करना
of
चाहिए दूसरा
a future, and we need to develop
धीरे
human
धीरे
resources for
दुनिया
that.
में
The second thing is that very
डिग्री से ज़्यादा
slowly,
स्किल का
I
महत्व
think
बढ़ता
what is
चला
becoming more important, not a college degree, but
आपके
the skill
पास
that you
ability
have.
कितनी है
It depends on
उस
what
पर
kind
बल
of
जाएगा
ability
और
you
इसलिए
have. I
हमने
think that
भारत
will
में
become more
हर
important,
लेवल
and for
पर
that, in
स्किल
India,
डेवलपमेंट के
we
अंदर बल
have
दिया जो
put a
ग्लोबल
lot of
वर्कफोर्स
focus
की
on skill
जरूरत है
development at different work
ग्लोबल
levels.
वर्कफोर्स को ध्यान में
There is
रखते
a
हुए
certain
भारत
kind
के
of
पास
global
युवा
workforce
धन
there
है
which is required.
अगर
For
युवा
example, India
धन
has this
दुनिया के
asset
काम आ
of
सकता
youth
है
people. If these
तो
youth
according
can
to
be
that requirement
useful to
हम
the
चाहते हैं
world,
जैसे
we
अभी
would
हमारा
like to make
जापान
sure
के
our,
साथ चल रहा
like
है
recently we
तो
have
जापान के
an
जिस प्रकार
understanding
के
with
ह्यूमन
Japan.
रिसोर्स की
In
जरूरत है
Japan, there is a
उसी
need for a
प्रकार का
certain
ह्यूमन
skill
रिसोर्स
set,
तैयार करना
certain type
उनको
of
ट्रेनिंग के लिए
human
वहाँ भेजना
resources. We are
उनके द्वारा
preparing this
हमारे यहाँ
human resources.
इंस्टीट्यूशन
We
चालू
send them
करना
for training
तो
into
हमने एक अच्छा
Japan.
मॉडल
We
डेवलप
have
किया है
institutions
आने
which
वाले
are being
दिनों
run
में
by the
दुनिया को
Japanese
जिस
with
प्रकार
Japanese
के
help. So this is the kind
ह्यूमन
of
रिसोर्स
things
की
we are
आवश्यकता
doing. So
है
we feel in the
उसके
world
रिक्वायर
the
के
kind of
अनुसार
human
ह्यूमन रिसोर्स तैयार
resources
करना
that are
स्किल
required.
डेवलपमेंट करना
We are trying
उस
to
पर
make
हम
that
बल
kind
दे
of
रहे
a skill
हैं तीसरी
development
बात
program in
ऑटोमेशन
India.
पे दुनिया जा रही
Third,
है
we all know
लेकिन
that
मैं
the entire
मानता हूँ
world is running
दुनिया
towards
बदलने के
automation.
बावजूद भी
But I feel
नए
that
नए
even though the
जॉब
world may
क्रिएशन की
change,
संभावनाएं
there
रहती हैं
always will be
तो
a
नए नए
possibility
जॉब
of new
क्रिएशन
job
को अभी से
creation.
विजुलाइज
I think it is
करना और
important to
अकॉर्डिंग टू
visualize
दैट
new job
हमारे
creation
सिलेबस को
now
बदलना
and
इसी
make sure
दिशा
that
में
our syllabus is in
दूसरी एक
line with
समस्या
that
जो है
requirement. The big
जो
other
बहुत बड़ा
problem,
इनिशिएटिव मैंने कल
which
यूएन में भी
in
उसका
fact just
उल्लेख किया
yesterday
था
I
और
talked
शायद आपके
about
इंटरेस्ट का
this
विषय है
at the
और मैं
UN, and I
चाहूंगा
think it
कि
might be of
ब्लूमबर्ग
interest to you, and I would
इसमें हमारे
like
साथ जुड़ करके मदद कर
Bloomberg
सकता
to
है
be to partner
हमने
with us
देखा
in
है
this
कि
particular
इन दिनों
subject.
क्लाइमेट चेंज
We've
के
noticed
कारण
that because of climate change
बहुत बड़ी
recently,
मात्रा में डिजास्टर हम आए दिन सुनते रहते हैं
every time we hear about these
ऐसे
disasters
में
due to
डिजास्टर
climate
रेजिलियंस
change, I think in
इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर
that
पर
kind
हमने
of a
बल देना
situation, we
पड़ेगा
need to focus on
दुनिया का एक
disaster
सर्वे
resilient
कहता है
infrastructure.
कि
One of
जब
the
बड़े
surveys
डिजास्टर होते हैं
mentions that when there
तो
is a
60
large
से
disaster,
70%
some 60
established
to
infrastructure को खत्म कर
70%
देते हैं
established
बहुत नुकसान
infrastructure
करते हैं
gets damaged
तो
or
डिजास्टर
terribly damaged
रेजिलिएशन
or finished or
इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर तैयार
terribly
करने के लिए
damaged. So we
इसका
have to
मतलब कि
have a
सिलेबस बदलने
disaster
पड़ेंगे
resilient infrastructure,
हमने
which means
मटेरियल
that
नए
we
लाने
have to
पड़ेंगे
change the syllabus of
टेक्नोलॉजी नई
students
लानी
accordingly.
पड़ेगी
The material
और
should be different.
ग्लोबल
New
वार्मिंग के कारण
technologies
जो
need
नए
to be
संकट आ
introduced,
रहे हैं
and the
उस
new
संकट
kind
को
of
निपटने के लिए
problems
व्यवस्थाएं
that
खड़ी
can be
करनी पड़ेगी
expected due to the global warming. We
ये
need to
आने
have
वाले
arrangements
दिनों
to
में
handle
बहुत
that
बड़ा एक
situation.
मार्केट
I
बनने
think
वाला
that this is going to
बहुत बड़ी
become a
इकोनॉमिक
very
एक्टिविटी
big
बनने वाली
market. It's going to
हमने
contribute
इसके
to
लिए
a
एक
very large
इंस्टीट्यूशन को जन्म
economic
देने का तय
activity.
किया है
So we
कल मैंने
decided
यूएन
to
में घोषणा की है
institutionalize this,
और
and
जैसे
just
हमने
yesterday I
इंटरनेशनल
announced this
सोलर
in the
अलायंस
UN.
शुरू किया
Just like we started
वैसा
the
ही
International
डिजास्टर
Solar Alliance,
रेजिलिएंस
similarly we are going to
इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के
start
निर्माण की दिशा में एक होलिस्टिक
a
व्यू
holistic
मैं
view
समझता हूँ ये
for
भी एक
disaster
बहुत
resilient
बड़ा
infrastructure.
यूथ
We
के
are going to
सामने हम चैलेंज के रूप में
institutionalizing.
काम
I
देने
think
वाले
this is a kind of a challenge that we can put forth to the youth.
In a world where social media seems to talk about everything that's going wrong, and we know there are a lot of things going right. We've reduced global poverty by 50% in the last 3 decades. How do you and other leaders get a good message out when the press really says that's not what people want to hear? They want to hear sensationalism and failure and all the bad things, and we know that's not true. What should a leader do today? It's a different world.
आप स्वयं मीडिया की दुनिया से जुड़े
You
हुए हैं
yourself are linked to the media
आप जो
world,
इस सवाल
and
पूछते हैं।
you yourself are asking me this question.
पहली बात है
The first point is,
मैं भारत के संदर्भ में कह सकता
I
हूँ
can
मैं
say
और
to you
जगह
in
पे नहीं
the
कह
context of India, I really don't want to talk about the rest of the world.
सकता। हमारे देश में बहुत
In
पहले घटना
our
हुई
country, there was an incident many years
Kandahar
ago
में हमारा
in
एक विमान
Kandahar.
hijack
One of our planes
उसमें
was
करीब
hijacked,
सैकड़ों की
and
तादाद में
there
हमारे
were
passengers थे, terrorists
many
ने
hundred passengers on
उनको
that
बैन में रखा हुआ
aircraft.
था।
The terrorists had kept them
लेकिन उस समय
captive.
नया-नया
But at
electronic
that
media
time,
था,
electronic
TV
media was very new. There
और
was a
उन्होंने
television,
जो
and
परेशान हुए जो नागरिक थे
the
उनकी
citizens,
कथाओं को इतना fire up कर
they
दिया
really talked a
कि वहाँ
lot
जो
about the
terrorists बैठे थे उनका
sufferings
हौसला बढ़ गया
of the
उनको लगने लगा कि
victims,
देखिए
etc.,
हिंदुस्तान में
that
तो
it
सरकार को
actually
तो इतना
increased
दबाव
the
है
courage
कि
of the
अब
terrorists.
टेररिस्ट
They
जो कहता है
believe
वो
that there's so much pressure on the
तो
government.
मुझे
definitely going to give in to our demands. And I remember very well that the television media had a meeting at the time, and they decided to make a self-assessment of all the mistakes they had made and how they could actually correct them. And I thought that was a good initiative, but that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. There's a lot of competition now. They want to give news out very quickly. They want sort of sensational news. So there's a sort of an era of competition. So I don't know whether this is really going to reform itself or not. Social media has given a very big strength for empowerment. Today, any person can put a message out there. So it is a very powerful instrument of democracy. But unfortunately, there is in an organized way, negative propaganda is being done. It is good that every media today is trying to highlight fake news. They're spending 10-15 minutes a day highlighting fake news. So every day, the social media and regular media, if they continue to focus on fake news, I think there will be an improvement in the situation. And the secondly, this fashion of forwarding messages, I think technology needs to find a solution that whereby there is some possibility of verifying news before we forward it. But I am myself very active on social media for many years, and I have had benefits as well from it. But I can see that if a small incident that takes place in a faraway village, I come to know from social media about it, and I can very quickly trigger action. I don't need to make a statement. I can start action. But for good governance, the information that we get from the local level, social media is extremely useful for that. And I believe that if governments are sensitive, if they have a motto of good governance, then for information, social media can be an excellent tool. And the same way, if we had a flood, for example, in our country, when I was in Gujarat, there was a river. There's a river there in Gujarat, and once in 5 years there is a flood. But once there was 5 floods in a single year, and the government machinery kind of was unable to cope. But I had the social media network, and I used to send messages out. We didn't really have the ability to send messages in many languages. So I used to use Roman characters to send messages in Gujarati. There was in a single year, we had 5 floods. There was some damage to property, but we did not lose a single person, and we did not lose a single animal, and therefore this was through social media. So I think that for good governance, social media can be used in a very positive manner. So as a leader, if you say, I believe that social media can be used as an excellent tool of good governance, and I am doing a lot in this area as well.
Mr. Prime Minister, our scheduler keeps flashing us a message saying we're out of time, but I wanted to thank you for generously giving us your time. American-Indian relations, I hope, will continue to improve. You've just been reelected. Use your time in office wisely. We need a strong India. And I wanted to thank you on behalf of the American people for all of the people of Indian extraction who've come here and changed our business and culture and technology. We have a great relationship, and we want to make that better. So thank you very much.
मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ, मुझे आपके बीच आने का मौका मिला, लेकिन मैं फिर से आपसे आग्रह कर रहा हूँ, अब हिंदुस्तान आपका इंतजार कर रहा है, हिंदुस्तान ही आपके लिए एक डेस्टिनेशन है, तो मैं चाहूँगा कि ब्लूमबर्ग के माध्यम से आप भारत में आइए, मैं भारत में आपके स्वागत के लिए तैयार हूँ। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, everyone.
Please turn your attention to the video screens for a special message from Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
I am very pleased to address the forum. And I want to thank my special envoy, Michael Bloomberg, for his leadership and commitment to climate action. You meet at a pivotal moment. We must tackle the climate emergency with far more ambition. We need a global transition to a carbon-neutral economy, starting with the phasing out of coal from our financial and energy systems. And we must shift taxation from income to carbon. This is essential for building stability around the world. The United Nations, governments, businesses, civil society must work together. This is a race we can and must win. Thank you.
Please welcome Chairman of the Board of Directors of AXA Group, Dennis DeVerne, Executive Managing Director and Chief Information Officer of the Government Pension Investment Fund, Hiro Mizuno, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Goldman Sachs Group, Incorporated, David Solomon, and our moderator, Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney.
Okay. Morning, everybody. We just heard from the Secretary General, call for action, emphasis on time. We only have 20 minutes, so we'll go straight into it. We have the world's largest pension fund, the world's leading insurer, and the world's leading investment bank. So we have a variety of perspectives across the capital markets. And I'll go straight to you, Hiro. How are you adjusting your portfolio towards a sub 2 degree world?
Sure. GPF manages 1.6 trillion US dollar worth of Japanese government pension funds. And we have a very well diversified portfolio with more than 6,000 company stocks and the bonds issued by 3,000 issuers. So that portfolio is really representing where the world capital market is heading to. And recently we did the TCFD compliant analysis of our portfolio, and unfortunately it was diagnosed that our portfolio is heading to a 3.5 degree plus world. So that's actually kind of evidencing where the world is heading. So in our portfolio, we have 50% in equity and 50% in fixed income. So for equity portfolio, we are shifting gradually, well, actually not more than gradually, our index from the traditional market cap weight index to ESG themes, including carbon efficient index. So we have mobilized roughly like a $40 billion investment from the traditional index to ESG or carbon efficient index. And also we have joined the investors group initiative, a group engagement program called the Climate Action 100 Plus, to have the engagement with the portfolio company which has heavy, the carbon intensive industry. So given our portfolio, which is really representing the global capital market, all those things we are doing is not really trying to make our portfolio look better, but by doing that, we are trying to affect the whole market. So the index has been a very convenient tool for us, a very effective tool, than trying to find here and there the other, the carbon less incentive or like less intense or renewable energy investment. And for the fixed income portfolio, it's been a bit slow, the market to pick up, how to, align the fixed income portfolio. So we did a great study with the World Bank Group, how to integrate environment factors into fixed income. And we started investing into the green bond. And that's the way we approach our portfolio. But still, we require much, the quicker shift of the market to achieve Paris Agreement.
Okay, we'll come back towards the end on what else is required. So 3.5 degrees. Denis, for AXA?
Yes, as you know, we've been involved in the TCFD as a vice chair, and this was a great initiative. And since then, we've looked at the warming potential of our portfolio. And when we look at a reference portfolio based on our asset allocation, the warming potential of the portfolio is 3.7 degrees. Our own portfolio is well below that, but still significantly above 2 degrees. We hold a portfolio of 550 billion euros. And of that, we have 80% of bond, and with that, 50% is government bonds. And when we look at government bond portfolio, if we buy US treasuries, the warming potential is 5.5 degrees. If we buy German or Japanese bonds, the warming potential is 3.5 degrees. If we buy French bonds, it's 1.9. So the vast majority of sovereign assets are above 2 degrees.
Yeah.
And on the corporate side, we do the same analysis. I think it's important that we move in that direction, but we cannot just on our own get to a below 2 degree portfolio. We invest as Hero, we invest in green bonds, but there is not at this point not enough issuance of green bonds. We have more green corporate bonds than green sovereign bonds because the landscape is not going fast enough in that direction.
Amazing. Yeah, so I just re-emphasize the sovereign point, which is as an insurance company, you do liability-driven investing, at least part of it, and the sovereign portfolio by itself biases your portfolio well above 2 degrees. David, maybe shifting from longer-term perspectives, core of the global capital markets, you're seeing all the flows. What are some of the most, how much is this part of the conversation, conversations you're having with investors, with CEOs, and what are some of the more interesting ideas or important ideas that you see coming?
Sure, and I'd say the conversation has amped up materially, over the course of the last year or two, and I'd say there's no place that I go where with either CEOs, with investors, with market participants, this is not a significant conversation. The volume's different in different places. I'd say particularly when you're over in Europe, you can just feel the groundswell of really popular sentiment that the urgency of this is elevated. I think here in the US, it depends where you are in terms of the level of engagement, but it's up everywhere and there's a lot of focus on it. I think the interesting thing that we wrestle with is from a capital markets perspective and the availability of capital, it's still relatively niche in terms of where it operates. So there's been a big growth in green bonds over the course of time, significant. Last year, about $250 billion of issuance of green or sustainability, linked bonds. But that's very, very small. It's 1%, kind of capital markets activity. It's very, very small. And so the question is, how do you find things that more mainstream this into the capital markets? And I think one of the big issues, green bonds are terrific, but one of the issues is that green bonds segregate capital. So you're raising capital that has to be ring-fenced or segregated, in a certain way. We just did something that I think is directionally the course of travel for NL. We issued a sustainable goal bond that basically was a general corporate purpose bond where the proceeds of the bond could be used for any activity, but they have set certain renewable goals. And if they meet those renewable goals over the next 3 years, the cost of that bond will be less than if they don't meet those goals. So they've gone out publicly, they've stated the goals, and we raised $1.5 billion in that context. So to me, that's just a representative example of a more mainstream capital markets transaction that allows a broader acceptance of the capital markets as a tool for this over time.
Yeah, and the crucial point, which is moving from sort of exclusion or deep green and towards momentum and tilt, if you will, because that's how you get to mainstream. One of the mainstream initiatives, you both mentioned it briefly, I think we should salute Mike Bloomberg on the TCFD, getting that going. Hero, go to you quickly. Just perspective on this. There's 120 trillion of assets that want TCFD compliant disclosure. How about the supply of that disclosure and the quality and the usefulness? Because there's been a big shift in Japan.
Sure. I mean, the last year, there was a big, the take-up among Japanese corporates to use the TCFD as a framework to disclose their climate-related risk, as well as their strategy for the future. And the good thing and a positive thing about a TCFD disclosure is, I know you want to make it a compulsory, which actually they have a very, very significant impact, which we wish. But even at the moment, being as a voluntary disclosure framework, it gives the chance for the corporate who are under huge pressure from the investor to discuss on the long-term strategy. So we have been encouraging Japanese corporations to disclose more and more TCFD while it's still voluntary, because the margin of error is much higher, so they can test. And then we are actually now urging our asset manager, our fund manager to utilize those information because the stress, frustration has been among the corporations. Even when they disclose those information, they don't feel like that information being used in their engagement with the investors. So I think we have to just create a demand from both sides. Demand from the corporate to give to have an opportunity to discuss on the more long-term issues, and for the investor to use it for the analysis. So GPF really hold our asset manager accountable to use those information when it's disclosed.
Denis, AXA was one of the founding members of this. You use it, your perspective?
So there has been a lot of work going on with specialized agencies that are helping us measure the warming potential of our portfolio. There is not yet a commonly accepted standard, but we are moving towards that, and there is extremely good work going on there. The main rating agencies are buying the firms that have specialized in this area, and there is, as you said, pressure from the investor community on the firms to disclose better and better information. So I believe we are gradually getting there in terms of TCFD becoming a de facto standard, even if it is not yet compulsory. And we have, in most cases, we have the relevant information that is required to do that. And we have also, on the other side, under probably your inspiration, Mark, the pressure from the regulators who are starting to stress test our balance sheet using the same type of analysis, what happens in a 2-degree world, 3-degree world, and so on. So I think the financial world is moving, I would say, much faster than the sovereign world, in my view.
Yeah. And this is 2 points there, if I abuse my position as moderator. One is possibility of being compulsory, mandatory in the next few years in Europe, including in the UK. It's something being seriously considered, so getting involved and shaping it. And then secondly, the stress testing. I mean, David, I suspect that if we asked to stress test Goldman today about in a sub 2-degree world, given all your exposures, would you have enough information to actually answer that question, given your exposures to your underlying clients?
We're working at it, but the answer is we're working at it. And I think this gets to the directional point as to how you more mainstream this. The more there's a clear policy framework and a direction with respect to that policy framework, the more you'll get a reaction and a response to it from the markets.
You mean policy framework? You mean government climate policy framework,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a crucial point. So we're time short, so I want to finish on the UK is going to be in charge of what's called COP26, which is the process, the climate policy process, global climate policy process next year, along with Italy. And then the following year, UK is G7 chair and Italy is G20 chair. One of the obvious focuses would be what needs to be done to advance mainstreaming and aligning private capital flows to a 2-degree world, sub 2-degree world. And you've all thought a lot about this, and you participated in an important report that I think is coming out today, the CFLI. Thoughts, 1 or 2 things that the UK should focus on for private capital flow alignment? Gero?
Well, I think this report, we really discuss a lot that what really has been prevent the private capital flow into sustainable the investment. And we listed up several the issues, but we're not going to, I'm not going to expect all of those will be solved at the COP or overnight. So what we think to do is that we put we show investors' demand to policymakers. We need to have clearer policy framework, but at the same time, I think that the investors should take advantage of a lack of clear policy at the moment to make a better return for the investors. So we need to do both things, pushing the policymaker to create the clearer framework to increase the predictability of our investment, but professional investors should take advantage of it at the moment, which we really don't see very often these days.
There's a first mover advantage, didn't you? Yeah.
The report talked a lot about infrastructure investments in emerging markets. And for regulated companies like insurance companies, it's not easy because there is a currency risk on top of political risk, and those countries are not necessarily well rated. we need more public-private partnership in that space so that the pension funds and the insurance companies can work with the multilateral development banks. And multilateral development banks should be able to sell their mature portfolios rather than ask for more capital in order to make room for the private investors in that space. That's one area. A second area, which is important in my view, is that there needs to be more pressure on the sovereigns. And I believe that the IMF needs to incorporate climate analysis in its analysis of the resilience of countries, and that would probably make the way for a better alignment between the private capital and the public capital.
Yeah, and bring forward some of those infrastructure investments for those sovereigns that are going to save money in the future. I should just reference quickly that you are chair of the IDF, which is looking to close that protection gap of the causes, the impact of climate change in these environments. David?
There's not a lot I can add to that. I'd emphasize what Hero had said. I think there are opportunities to be creative, and I compliment what GPIF is doing. For example, they've got a portfolio. We manage a portfolio of Japanese equities for them that has what's called a carbon tilt, where obviously they're trying over time, while still tracking the index, to bring down the carbon exposure, but to not disinvest. And it's a creative way to make progress, to move in a direction that I think we all have to move in. So I think there's a lot of latitude to be creative and find ways to move in the direction. Fundamentally, I'll go back to a clear long-term policy framework will create the commercial incentives, pressure on governments. As Denis is saying, when you get to the emerging markets, I think the multilateral development banks are very important because you don't have the capital formation there to support what we're talking about, and so you need help. And so those are things I would emphasize.
I think it's a great place to end. There's a lot of momentum. You've got longer-term capital. You've got the core of the system, and a system that will pull forward adjustment if there's that credibility that from the policymakers, the climate policymakers.
Absolutely.
Look. Perfect. We're on schedule. Let it be said. We're on schedule.
Well
Perfect.
navigated.
Right.
Well done. Well done, Mark.
Well done. Please welcome Chief Executive Officer of Global Banking and Markets, HSBC, Samir Asaf. Chief Executive Officer of Enel, Francesco Starace. Chief Executive Officer of Allianz Global Investors, Andreas Uterman. Chief Executive Officer of the Macquarie Group, Shimara Wickramanayaka. And our moderator, former Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund and incoming President of the European Central Bank, Madame Christine Lagarde.
So good morning to all of you, and I'm delighted to moderate a panel which has a relative level of parity about us, which is always good. Before we head into the discussion, I'm delighted to welcome something that will be on screen, which is a film that was made by a woman, which has to do with the topic of our panel, the need for renewable energy at scale. And it will tell you the story of a young female entrepreneur who helped create a solar power startup in Lagos, Nigeria. And that real story by one person helps us indicate that committing to a sustainable future is something that can actually be achieved. So no further ado, film is on, let's watch it. It's about 2 minutes, not taken from our 20 minutes.
We dreamt of helping transform Nigeria, and I made that dream come true.
I'm Anuada Solom, COO of RenSource. We build solar hybrid micro-utilities that provide energy to businesses and everyday people so they don't have to use diesel generators. You know the kind of kid who actually loves doing homework? That's me.
In Lagos, when there's a power outage, we say we don't have light, and we don't have light daily. How do you do your homework when the lights keep going off? Nigeria is oil rich, but Nigerians, are energy poor. One day, I want to manage a company of my own, a company with vision.
And that company is RenSource. Our goal is to solve this country's power problem. The entire country runs on millions of diesel generators. With so little power, we can't effectively run our hospitals, factories, homes. RenSource is changing that. In just 4 years, we powered 10,000 small and medium enterprises. My dream is to have a green and thriving economy with reliable power and clean air.
And that dream almost came true. Look at us now. Everyday people went back to the old wasteful way of getting power from fossil fuels, and governments were not able to shift quickly enough to clean options. The south of our country, filthy from oil, has no more fish. The air is toxic from gas flaring. So many dreams for nothing.
But it doesn't have to be. I can still hear the voice of the girl who dreamed of transforming Nigeria. And I can imagine the voice of the woman if we fail. We must not fail.
Wow. Okay, bouncing from that really moving film. We have here 4 of the great and the goods of finance and energy coming from all corners of the world and all people with a big heart and the determination to do good. Currently, about $354 billion are invested in renewable energy. Only 13% of that invested in emerging markets, not including China. What's the matter? What's missing? How do we scale? What are the hurdles? This is what we want to extract from these fantastic people. I'll start with you, Samir. You're leading the charge in one of the largest banks in the world. You want to do good. You want to generate return. You know how to evaluate risks. What is missing so that we can scale up and address those issues?
Well, thank you, Madame Lagarde. It's a very important topic for actually all of us, our children, but as well our economies. Emerging markets, by the United Nations report, need almost 2.5 to 3 trillion per year.
That's
investments.
At least 6 times what I've just mentioned.
Exactly.
And in emerging markets, it's even more.
So we see the gap still between what is needed to help developing and emerging market transition to a low carbon energy versus what we are doing now. So what we need is focus on how do we scale up what we are doing now. So it is only mainly a question of scale. And in my view, to scale up what we are doing today, we should be working much more closely, the private sector and the public sector, providing the financing needed. I think that there is a lot of finance available. What is needed is how do we organize ourselves? Private sector will probably provide most of the debt, and the public sector, is it the international banks, the development banks, or the national development banks would need to provide the guarantees or the equities that de-risk the private sector in this approach.
Okay, so if I get it, the public takes the risks and the private takes the profit.
Well, it's a bit more subtle than that.
I'm sure it is.
In the sense that the public sector needs just to put the guarantees, that allows the private sector to go, and
you pay for that. You pay the price for that guarantee.
And we will pay the price, and everyone is ready to pay the price, and no one would. It's not philanthropy. It's really for profit, but for profit for all.
Okay, so public-private cooperation de-risking a portion of the project, and then the scaling is possible. Francesco, I know that you are moving into a new financial construction, and you address that issue partly. Can you tell us a bit more about your transition bond?
Yes.
And jump on anything that Samir has mentioned.
What Samir said is absolutely right. Maybe we should also be aware that the amount of investment money available for this kind of endeavor is really large, much larger than what is needed. Actually, there is an excess of offering from the market. The question is how to channel it, how to vehicle this investment. And so far, of course, debt market is there, and the bond market has been active only on green bonds, basically. Nothing wrong with green bonds, but green bonds have been a very useful tool so far. It's still there.
But there's not enough of it.
But let's say that they are cumbersome. It's a tool that has its own complexities, and not all companies can afford the complexities, not all investors want to bother with them. So it's a little bit of a limited vehicle. So we started to see what can be done, and we worked around this market and launched this bond that was issued a couple of weeks ago. It's not a specific bond for that investment or that investment. It's a $1.5 billion bond in the US bond market, linked to the company reaching certain goals of renewable capacity by year 2021. A discount on the commercial bond market because it is a less risky proposition if we grow renewables. And of course, an increase in the interest we pay if we don't meet this goal. So
you have an incentive to meet the goals.
Yes, of course it's a pretty simple mechanism if you look at it that way. I'm surprised that there's been such a big, but that, the amount of interest that this bond has raised is a testimony of the fact that there is a lot of investors looking for this kind of tools. You will be looking at similar bonds coming up. SDGs are important because they provide the metrics. So you put the metrics.
Can I annoy you on this issue of metrics, because I know that you are very keen on the measurements and the metrics.
I'm an engineer, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. We have not a financial person, but an engineer, even better. Yeah. Do we have proliferation of indicators and metrics and measurement systems, and how do we combine them? How do we arrive at enough coordination so that it can be reliable and used by all?
I think sustainability is a fuzzy word,
yeah,
right? So it's not like credit, although credit has also been used in a fuzzy way in some instances. But sustainability is really complex to put your arms around it. So a lot of effort is being put on sustainability rating, rankings, all kinds of metrics. I think it's going to go away. There will be a consensus on a few clear metrics over the years. So we need to wait for markets.
How long will
that
take?
I think it will take something in the range of 5 years.
Will it require cooperation?
It will require a lot of cooperation and a lot of convergence between the investors, the companies, and the rating agencies, because at the end, someone needs to be there to manage this whole process. So it's a big opportunity in business for rating agencies because it's a complete new environment. But while this happens, we need something. So as you have hybrid cars waiting for electric cars, then we have this kind of sustainability-linked bonds while the system converges to a more holistic approach. And this is, I think, the new movement. By the way, I think structuring SDG-linked bonds, the thinking will converge.
Can you, please.
Standardization is a key factor to scale up. Standardization means principle, disclosure, taxonomy, and then rating agencies involved. Are they these rating agencies or new rating agencies involved?
I hear what you say, but equally, the standardization, when you have to measure on almost a country-by-country, sector-by-sector basis, Because while you might decide that an investment in electric cars is great, if the electricity is produced by coal in a particular country, it's not going to be that great in terms of rating. So
that's the role of taxonomy.
True, but taxonomies is going to have to be really granular and go down into sector, countries, and very specifically. So, Andreas, I want to go back to my question. What's missing between the 354 billion, meager, relative to the 10 times what's needed in emerging markets?
I mean, I agree very much with what Samir said earlier, which is we need a greater level of cooperation between the public and the private sector. I don't think it's about the public sector making all the profits. It's more about the ability to the public sector to really bring leverage to the table, and that's really going to close the gap between the demand and what's currently being supplied. But picking up on this topic of collaboration, I think what the CFLI has brought to the table, really for the first time, and under the inspirational leadership of Michael Bloomberg here, is to get companies that typically compete quite fiercely in the marketplace, all of us here in the previous panel, to actually work together for 9 months and beyond and come up with joint solutions to tackle these problems. And that's really innovative. And I don't think that in my company, without this impetus and without the pressure that came from that, we would have been able to announce today the launch of our impact fund, which is the first impact fund for European investors, which is a blended vehicle. And that's really, I think, innovative, and that's going to bring us a hell of a lot further down the road in the next 2 or 3 years. I think this is just the start of this cooperation between large organizations to bring this to the table.
What is impact fund? 1 minute.
An impact fund is a vehicle that can invest in debt or equity instruments that is particularly targeted at, for example, fulfilling some of the SDGs of the UN, but particularly measuring the impact that the investment has, typically decarbonization or reducing pollution or poverty or the like. To your earlier point, this is where the measurement and the statistics and the data become very important. And I think the engagement by the asset owners and asset managers with those organizations, be it public or private sector, will become critical in the next few years. I don't think standardization per se is going to be the answer. It's going to be an iterative process.
So who are you accountable to in terms of these objectives that are set?
Well, we're accountable to our own moral standards and to following the lead of the UN SDGs, but ultimately also the asset owners who entrust us with their money. And they often have very different and diverse aims.
And you see a shift in them in terms of direction of investment and
we talked about it earlier in the back. I think it's about 100% of our clients now feel that this is a very, very important topic.
Fascinating.
Look, I think we've got to be realistic about the fact that when you talk about 3 trillion and a 10 times increase, this is a massive step we need to take. So we've come a long way to get to 300 billion a year. But to get this investment increased, and particularly in emerging markets, there's a lot of challenges we face. As the last panel was discussing, I think there's 300 trillion of savings in the world and about 80 trillion of it professionally managed. It has a bias towards going to the lower risk and more moderate return investment opportunities, especially in this sort of world where capital protection is important to them. And I think the point you made is an important one, that we mustn't forget that stakeholder whose money is invested. These are pensioners, mums and dads trying to provide for their retirement, and we have to balance that with the other stakeholder being the community that actually needs this capital and expertise. And in connecting those two and creating de-risked opportunities to deliver what's needed, a lot of expertise is needed, a lot of patience is needed. So I agree with the last panel that measurement and transparency is super important so that the investors can see and the intermediaries can see what's being delivered and be accountable. But I also agree with Samir's point that public-private partnerships are very important, because in de-risking the investments in the emerging markets, and to your point, it has to happen not just country by country, but project by project, where structures are created to build this project pipeline where we de-risk. Now, places like Brazil, South Africa, India are developing reverse auction mechanisms that help the private money come in. The public money is taking first loss. The concessional finance organizations like the Green Climate Fund are helping. But what we're also trying to do is create structures where the private market can come in. So more and more now, corporates are stepping up with PPAs and off-takes because the cost of solar has come down 90%, the cost of wind has come down, and new build solar and wind are very competitive. In fact, more competitive than fossil fuel solutions, plus the corporates are bringing in their sustainability objectives. So to the extent we can bring corporate off-takes that are particularly US dollar denominated, it's helping bring private capital to these projects without necessarily the public sector involvement because, you know, the currency risks are less, et cetera. So I think there's a lot to be done brick by brick, but all these solutions our panel are talking about.
Francesca, I'm going to give you the floor one more second, but to give you time to think about it, I'm going to ask you, number one, if carbon pricing would actually be a financial incentive that would work in the various schemes that you consider. And second, you know, I'm Mrs. Nobody for a month in my life, and I might soon be a central bank governor, and I would ask you, because I've asked you what you can do, and I'm going to ask you what a central bank governor can actually do to participate in that process. But you have the floor for 1 second.
I just wanted to add that at the end of the day, it is all about a risk that we're talking about. When we invest in emerging countries, OECD area, developing countries. It's all about the risk profile of the single project. And of course, as we see the unfolding of the energy transition, the risk that we're looking at is that as OECD countries get heavily into the renewable energy transition, they are the fiercest competitor on capital markets with emerging countries because their risk profile is lower. And we know them, and we know the system year on year. Since we started investing in renewables, every single year, the US market, with the Obama administration and Trump administration, no change in that, has always overshoot the expectations we had the previous year.
Because the risk return is so much more favorable.
It's a very efficient, easy market. So I think really the concern is not that the capitals are not there, but where do they go? You know, where are they selectively going? And I think it's important that what Samir said, you know, the de-risking of emerging market is a critical point if we want to rebalance this trend.
So it's under the combined pressure of the de-risking that is allowed by the authorities and the strength of the asset managers who are themselves, I guess, pushed by the investors and by you and me, that eventually things will change. Let's hope so. Now, I want to go back to my questions. The carbon pricing, would that be a help or not? There's no good carbon pricing around. The average is about $2 per ton of carbon emission, which is way too low. If we had been at the right price back in 2015, the emission would have reduced by 28%. The number of deaths by pollution would have reduced by 45%. We haven't done it. Would that help financially?
It will force definitely the outcome, but we will have to be very careful of what would be the impact on emerging and developing markets. Because the topic here is not to force emerging and developing markets to grow less. We want to continue supporting them growing even more, but transitioning to the low carbon. So I think that pricing is important, but more important than that is to provide to the emerging market and to the developing countries, you know, the right financial solutions, and in a massive way. The second thing you've asked about central banks. Two things for central banks. First, you are reserve managers, so you own assets as well, and you can help actually participating and investing in more green assets, even though it can be government bonds or so on and so forth. But this should be an invested asset class in central banks. Secondly, the stress test within the financial community are very important because it will create awareness on what's the risk for holding, you know, all these assets that may be stranded in the future, and the impact on prudential.
So revised risk-weighted methods and inclusion in the stress testing.
Positively and negatively.
Yeah. You know, maybe I can add that more than the carbon market, which definitely help, one should look at reducing the incentives to fossil fuels that still exist in many parts of the world. And then there is an added complexity that imagine that you have carbon pricing on a country that has heavily subsidized fossil fuels. How can they cope with this contradiction? So I think first and foremost, we should remove, which is not easy because it's a politically sensitive argument, the incentives to fossil fuels where they exist.
Yeah.
And then on a level playing field, you can talk about carbon pricing. Otherwise, you get into these crazy situations where you can subsidize the use of a fuel and then carbon tax the result, which is like, I mean, people would not understand that at all.
This is ever so true,
yes.
Because, speaking for the IMF, numbers haven't changed much.
No.
And if you look at the latest cost of subsidizing fossil fuel energy, if you include the direct and the indirect cost, we're still talking about $5.2 trillion.
And it's wasted,
which is huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's only half. There's only one side of the coin, because I think carbon pricing is right, reducing subsidies is right, but there are a whole host of other externalities that exist that we know about that need to be taxed, because externalities today are not properly priced.
But if you price carbon properly, then part of the externalities would be
yeah, it needs to be a combination of both.
Yeah. Okay. So because I'm not your supervisor, you have no advice for me. I take it.
I was also going to mention, we've been talking a lot about the energy sector, but, it's only a quarter of where the world emissions come from. So there are a lot of harder to abate sectors as well that in emerging markets need attention, agriculture, transportation. And again, those of us in the private sector have a big role to play in terms of solutions, precision farming, technologies, et cetera, to bring to emerging markets. So for us particularly, we manage about 11 million hectares of farmland, and we are trying to bring solutions to investors of products like energy efficiency agriculture funds that are going to focus on reducing emissions. But I think we all have a role to play in bringing all those sorts of solutions as well. But as I said, we've been working on this commission to six-fold increase financing. In addition to that, there's expertise required, there's structuring done, there's market movements, products that we have to develop, so a lot of work.
We all have a role to play. We could not finish on a better note. With that, please give a big round of applause to our speakers.
Please welcome Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Iger. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon. And our moderator, anchor at Bloomberg Television, Francine Lacroix.
Gentlemen, thank you. So let's go straight to it. We have a lot to talk about, not that much time. So I love that we're at a global business forum, but actually I'm speaking to two gentlemen that were both born in New York City, and you've risen to the top of your game in your various industries. What is the one thing that has made your success? Bob Iger.
Hard work. I've loved what I do throughout my career, 45 years, and that's enabled me to just apply myself and work hard.
Okay, the second one. A lot of people work hard.
Great mentors. I've had some fantastic teachers along the way. If you want me to add a third, luck. Just great luck.
Jamie Dimon?
Yeah, I would add, he's done a great job, and I'd add that. I've always told you, I've learned a lot by watching other people too, how they deal with things and issues. So absolutely hard work, try to be disciplined, and not always done that, and then luck. I think there's a big element that I don't care what you do in life, but you got to navigate it, and things happen in ways you don't expect.
Okay, but what does it mean being a leader in 2019, and how has that changed in the last 10 years?
Well, I think being a leader today is probably different because the world is changing much faster. Technology clearly is increasing the speed of change, no matter what direction you look. Far more disruption than ever before, and I think it requires a patience, it requires guts, more ability to take risks, and an ability to make decisions without having all the answers, because the answers are harder to get at given the speed of change.
Is it more difficult to navigate because of the changing political system?
I think there's certain things that don't change. Discipline, detail, analytics, facts, stuff like that. personal relationships, trusting people, earning trust every day, those are the same. The speed is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the thing about the speed, which may be true in your business too, is you can organize, you have to organize around it differently. So that agile technology means agile management. So you can have little teams that can do stuff that used to take hundreds of people to do, 6 people can do it, and your competitors are moving that much faster. And the second, I think, is the global political complexity of corporate roles and how you do that. So dealing with being a productive part of the collaborative discussion with government to get things done that are good for countries.
Okay, what advice would you give and what advice would you take from politicians?
Well, I seek advice from politicians when it comes to regulation in various countries around the world, get advice about government relations and knowledge that they may have of government officials in countries we're doing business. But most politicians that you deal with have never been in business. And so seeking business advice from politicians is not something I typically do. I respect their opinion on things. Certainly, they help us enter markets. But it's pretty limited to that.
Jamie?
Policy is complicated, and collaboration is necessary, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So you see a lot of policies that are supposed to lift up the people of the country, and they drag them down. And so I give you a million examples of that. So I think a really good politician should figure out the policy, figure out what can be achieved in the political environment, and then get it done, as opposed to going with the wind and thinking oversimplistic things are actually going to work. You know, countries, you've seen countries around the world that are doing great for the people. You see countries around the world that are doing terrible. And the terrible is always in the name of good. Always. Just listen to the politicians out there. So do the right policy and move on. If you don't get reelected, so be it.
How often do you get asked if you want to run for president or run for public office?
Pretty often.
And your answer has always been no. Not now?
No, my answer hasn't always been no, but my answer is no now. I considered it at one point. I discussed it with my wife. She had a funny line. She said, you can run for any office that you'd like, just not with this wife. In other words, find someone else. Thought that was somewhat discouraging.
How many times have you been asked?
People ask, and I think that I see people ask all the time, hundreds of different people, so I don't think someone should be flattered by the fact that people ask. I'm not going to. I love what I do. I think we can make a huge productive contribution around the world just from the platform I have.
Is that because you feel like you can make a bigger difference as chief executive? Or is it because you're not made for public office?
I think it's the best I can do. I mean, the best I can do is to do my job really well, and that does lift up people around the world. If I can finance economies and cities and states and participate, and I love it, and then I'll do something else one day.
Is there a vacuum left by politics and politicians that chief executives must fill?
I hope not. I hope not. I don't think there's anything wrong with a chief executive going into politics, but no, I don't think it's about a vacuum that has to be filled. I think, by the way, the world needs great leaders, and I think our political system, at least in the United States, is not designed right now to necessarily develop great leaders or to encourage more people to seek public office. It just is far more difficult. Now, I've never been in it, but from what I observe, it's far more difficult to run for office today than ever before. And if you do it as a sitting CEO, it's virtually impossible. You can't run your company and run for office at the same time.
Yeah, I would say there's probably an overlap of skills between a CEO and a good politician, but it's not a complete overlap. And that, you're basically getting into a ring, which is far more complicated than you've ever dealt with before in the political ring. So you're going to see a lot of CEOs, they try it, and it's a dismal failure, because they didn't have that other part of the skills. And a lot of people, you learn the retail political skills is a skill. To get out there and talk to people and listen to everything and take questions at town halls. And I wouldn't expect every CEO to be good at something like that.
The other thing that's obvious to me is that as a CEO, you can exhort your people to communicate with one another, to collaborate with one another, to trust one another. You get into an elected office, and it's almost impossible to get that from the people you need to get it from. And so it makes it much harder to be productive. And as CEOs, we're used to being productive. That's how we get graded. I'm not sure politicians or elected officials necessarily get graded on productivity. It's almost not expected of them at this point, which is not necessarily a great place for us to be.
Can I just add to that?
Yep.
I think every political organization, I'm talking about the agencies, the departments, and I'd say around the world, owes the citizens, you gave me this money for A, B, and C, and not input, what did you accomplish? Because we spend $4 trillion a year, and I don't see a lot of people evaluating what we spend it on and did we get it. I mean, it's easy to say we should do more, but as we all know, broken systems, you can have all the money you want at broken systems, and they still are broken, and they just suck up more money.
But you have
no return on invested capital. You ever hear of
exactly.
ROIC of a politician or an elected official?
Right.
But you have to be popular as a politician. Do you have to be popular as a chief executive?
You have to be what?
Popular. Do people have to like you?
No, I don't think you have to be liked. I think you have to be respected. I think it goes a long way. I think you have to be appreciated. It's not a popularity contest. I think if you try to run a popularity contest, then you don't make the tough decisions. And that's difficult. I think you have to be fair and known as someone that is fair and accessible and communicative. And there are a number of things that are critical, but popularity is not one of them.
You don't have to be liked. You just need
No,
to get the results.
I agree with what Bob just said, yeah.
Respected.
Respected. Bob Iger, you have a new book out. What did you learn about yourself writing it?
My shameless plug for my book. I wrote a book about being
And I want to sign copies.
I will sign a copy. And I was CEO of the Walt Disney Company about 15 years. I call it a ride of a lifetime. It's been a really interesting experience for me, and the company has been transformed during my time because of a lot of our acquisitions in a world that is changing so fast. And a company that was founded in 1923, maintaining its relevance in today's world. In terms of what I learned about myself, I learned that I obviously have persistence to last 45 years at a company and a business. And again, what we talked about earlier, the value of hard work and mentorship and luck.
You talk about going to China to also do and sign some of the parks. How long do you think it will, take for China to retrust the U.S. again, given the trade war?
Well, we look at China in perhaps a different way. Look, there are clearly issues that have to get dealt with, trade-related issues, serious trade-related issues. I actually look at China, though, as more of a glass half full, at least for our company. It was a market that was relatively inaccessible to us for a long time. It's now the second largest movie market in the world for us. And we built a huge theme park in Shanghai with significant government support, including infrastructure, roads, mass transportation, trains, waste removal, power station, all basically at their expense. They welcomed us there and let us build Shanghai Disneyland. So we have a good relationship with the government of China and local governments in China, and our access has actually increased over time. Should there be a level playing field in certain circumstances? Absolutely. Are there other issues that have to get dealt with? Intellectual property protection being one, cybersecurity another, of course. But I generally, at least as the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, look at China quite favorably.
How much do you worry about the trade war impacting the world economy?
Yeah, well, it is. So I agree with Bob. The trade issue is serious. It has to be dealt with. The method could have been different, whether the tariffs work, but a lot of people said it's the only thing you can try. So it's serious. But I think there should be a little more, people should look at China a little bit differently. And I say this out of respect. They don't have enough food, water, and energy. Their neighbors are really complicated, including the Koreas, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, and Russia. Okay, they have 500 million people living in poverty. They got a GDP per person of 10,000. America has all the food, water, and energy we need. We have wonderful neighbors in Mexico and Canada. We've got the gifts that were given to us by the founding fathers called freedom of speech, freedom of religion, which led to the most innovative schools and universities and companies. And even if we do a crappy job running this country for the next 30 years, our GDP per person will be 3 times theirs 30 years from now. And I'm just pointing out to people that, and we have a common interest, right? We have common interest in growth, peace, nuclear deproliferation, anti-terrorism. So, it could be worked out. But it's
environment.
Environment. And, we should try to be friendly and understand their problems, and they should take trade more serious than they have.
But so what is a trade war actually about? Is it world supremacy? Is it something else?
No, it's trade. It's fair trade. They entered the WTO 17 years ago, and they could have, should have done more things. You've heard all the IP, subsidies, state-owned enterprises, domination industries. It's just get fair. Fair, and fair means kind of reciprocal. Trade has never been reciprocal, but closer to reciprocal in a way that's good for everybody. And I hope we get there. I don't expect it to happen before the elections, to tell you the truth, but I hope after that we have a fair trade deal.
You have one of the most successful companies in the world, one of the most known companies in the world. How are all countries different? Do they expect different things from their leaders and from their employers?
Well, I look at it more from a cultural perspective. Because of technology, in many respects, borders have broken down, and that technology enables us to tell our stories, to bring our intellectual property globally with much more ease than ever before. but it can be misleading. The world is not homogenous. It's not a one culture world. There's a lot of interest in local culture and respect for local culture. So as we look at the world, no two countries really are the same culturally. Even though our stories tend to be universal in nature, we have to be extremely careful when we bring our global stories into markets that we do so with a degree of respect and a degree of relevance and care about local culture.
And 5 years ago, you launched Advancing Cities, which is a program that helped, for example, in Chicago, Washington, and Paris. Why did you do that?
Yeah, so a lot of the companies do a lot of work to help the communities, and we saw it started with Detroit. We saw Detroit was an accident waiting to happen for 20 years. 2 former mayors went to jail. The population went from 2 million to 700,000. And we basically had a great mayor, Mayor Duggan. It was exceptional. We said, and we're one of the biggest banks there. So, and it was started by one of our predecessor banks, the National Bank of Detroit, started by General Motors. And we said, we want to go help. How can we uniquely, what can we do? We don't have all of your cultural type of things, but skills, entrepreneur of color funds, affordable housing, infrastructure investing, helping not-for-profits, collaboration, and it works. I mean, if you go to Detroit today, you'd be shocked. It's working, it's turning, and I think we should make Detroit an example of America at its best, not America at its worst.
Talk to me about how you want to be remembered at the company when you leave the company, both of you. Maybe we'll start with Bob Iger.
What was the question again?
What you want to be remembered for.
Oh,
right?
Well, I inherited a company that was founded almost 100 years ago. And if you look back at the history of companies, and you look at the companies that existed in the 1920s when Disney was founded, and how many of them are still globally relevant today, there are not many. So more than anything, maintaining Disney's presence in the world as a positive force in this world. So when you think of the world today, I believe that the importance of art and entertainment and basically manufacturing fun, enabling people to hear stories and watch stories has never been more important. So Disney's position in the world as a relevant company, as an important company, 100 years after its founding, that's what I'd like to be known for.
When I first became CEO of Bank 1 years ago, former CEO came to see me and said, you've got to make a mark, have a legacy, have something that people remember. I always say to myself, if a CEO does that, sell the stock. These are large, complex companies that operate in 100 countries around the world with technology and people and reputation risk and all these various things. I just want to do the same thing. I want to take what I got, hand it off to someone else better than where they found it, and hopefully they're going to take it. 1799, by the way, is predecessor companies of ours, and just make it better and leave it a healthy, vibrant institution that people say the SOB did a kind of a good job while I was here.
But do you worry about the bank of Amazon or the bank of Google?
Of course, but you're always going to have competition, and so we compete aggressively, but I expect that to happen one day somewhere from around the world, and we look at that around the world. The Chinese banks are now bigger than we are. Not in terms of market cap, but in terms of balance sheet and stuff like that. You're going to have very aggressive companies trying to compete in our business. And my job is to make sure I leave it healthier than I found it.
So I also learned that Jamie Dimon, many years ago, pitched a film to Bob Iger. And it didn't go so great, so we're going to give him a second chance.
It was, no, let's not. It was very gutsy of him. When you're in the movie business and the head of a bank comes in with a movie idea, I mean, you show respect, but you don't take it very seriously.
He owed us a lot of money, but... So
I was very direct with him. I said, that's just a bad idea. You're a great banker, but...
He graded it. He listened to me. I gave him like a 1-minute pitch, and he said, it's a C.
By the way, can you imagine if I came in and gave him any ideas about how to run his bank?
Exactly.
Are we doing
a movie guy doing that?
Are we doing an elevator pitch? We have 30 seconds left.
We should swap jobs for a while and see what happens to our
It was about marriage. It was a marriage counseling thing, or, something like that, right?
It was about a woman who couldn't pick men very well, so she'd have a board of directors of women who would be testing men for her and picking her husband.
There might be some other movie. There might be some other movie executives in the room that would be glad to consider.
And Bette Midler, I said Bette Midler should be part of the cast, and that woman in Veep.
I feel like we have a collaboration. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Please welcome Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern. European Commissioner for Trade, Cecilia Malmström. Chief Executive Officer of Citigroup, Michael Corbett. Chief Executive Officer of Credit Suisse, Tidjane Thiam. and our moderator, Editor-in-Chief of The Economist, Zanny Minton-Beddoes.
Good morning, everybody. We are going to talk in this panel about where trade and the climate intersect. And freer trade and a greener climate are, I think, two enormously important goals. One is a tried and tested route to prosperity. Addressing climate change is the greatest challenge of our time. They're both also areas where multilateralism has been the key forward, and multilateralism is not in great shape right now. And they're also, I think, areas where many people, particularly some of the people protesting out on the streets today, think these two are in tension. There is an increasing view that freer trade is not good for the climate. And so I wanted to kind of start with that and talk a bit about whether that's true, and if it isn't, how we make sure that freer trade is good for the climate and how we can have a win-win. So Prime Minister, I wanted to start with you just with the very simple question. Is freer trade good for the climate?
Very simple question with a complex answer. It should be. But one of the issues we have, of course, is, as you point out, have we built the social license? Do people genuinely believe that free trade is delivering the outcomes that we need? And so I think if we start with building social license as a starting point, then we start to rethink the way that we're using our tools. And so it's as simple as bringing alignment between the environmental goals, indeed expectations we should have upon ourselves, with actually our trade tools and our trade devices. And we're not doing that at present. So let's start with our free trade agreements. We have the ability when we negotiate, be it multilateral or bilateral agreements, to make sure that we are embedding environmental principles within them that are in keeping with our stated aspirations and goals. Secondly, let's use the WTO to remove the distortions that currently exist, and fossil fuel subsidies to the tune of $500 billion is an obvious example, and yet for 10 years we have been trying to remove those. And thirdly, let's incentivize. Why don't we create specific trade tools that say, well, between ourselves, we will eliminate tariffs on goods and services that will address climate issues. So solar panels, wind turbines, LED lights, and actually New Zealand is advocating for that. We'll be making an announcement today about that very kind of trade instrument alongside like-minded countries. So the answer is yes, but we haven't developed that and delivered that fully.
So yes, it can be.
It can be. We just have work to do.
Commissioner Malmström, you have, as Trade Commissioner of the EU, really pushed this in your trade deals, and particularly, I think, in the Mercosur trade deal, which has just been finalized, but yet at the same time, that is a trade deal that has become incredibly politically unpopular because there is a view that this is sort of accelerating the burning down of the rainforest. So can you talk a bit about how you think you can incorporate in climate change goals in trade agreements?
Well, I agree very much with the Prime Minister that if trade is well done, it can be something that supports a sustainable development. We are in the European Union embedding in all our trade agreements strong chapters on sustainable development based on international conventions on labor and on human rights, but also on environment. We are reflecting international conventions on endangered species, illegal logging, and references in the last ones to the Paris Agreement, making them binding, saying that what we all agreed upon in the Paris Agreement, the commitments that everybody has made, and they're quite specific, are reflecting in a binding way in our trade agreements. And that is a way to keep countries engaged. And also, because a trade agreement is part of a bigger cooperation partnership, we can also cooperate in research, in innovation, etc., to make it happen. And the Mercosur agreement has been very much criticized lately because of the fires in Amazon, which is, of course, extremely worrying because they are the lungs of the planet, but you cannot accuse the Mercosur agreement of causing that. The Mercosur agreement just was politically agreed in June. It hasn't entered into force yet. It will take another 2 years at least before it entered into force. It's not translated yet. It's not legally scrubbed. So it's still time to go. But we think that is a way to, for instance, keep Brazil and others in the climate agreement and make sure that they live up to what they have promised there.
So just to be clear on that, that means there is a linkage between a trade agreement and the climate agreement. So if a country has a trade agreement with the EU, it can't then leave the Paris Agreement.
No, and that is why we cannot right now have a comprehensive trade agreement with the US.
Because the US is, so the US would basically have to commit to Paris Agreement before it could have a comprehensive trade agreement with the EU.
True.
I'm going to come back onto more of that tariff stuff, but I want to bring our two financiers in here, our two bankers, and the comment you made earlier about fossil fuel subsidies, and I think that's one of the most distorted parts of the world economy is the fact that we still subsidize fossil fuels. We also don't have enough money going to green technologies on the financing side. We talked about that on earlier panels. Do the two of you think that how much would the financial flows change if you actually got rid of fossil fuel subsidies? Would that change?
If we got rid of what?
Got rid of fossil fuel subsidies. If you actually made serious progress there, would that dramatically affect the allocation of capital that you would give to those industries? Tidjane.
So you said the impact of eliminating fossil fuel subsidies on trade patterns. Look, I think that process is underway anyway. The world economy is moving. When you talk to the oil and gas sector, and this is a sector where we're very active as Credit Suisse, that dialogue is now at the CEO level, how to transition from the model we have to a more efficient and a cleaner model. So there's a lot of work being done on that, good dialogue, and I think it's moving in the right direction. Now, it's a bit difficult to predict the direct impact on trade. What I think is that all those efforts are going to produce better quality growth and more sustainable growth, which will then in turn lead to better quality trade, if you wish. Because if you think about the impact of climate change, particularly on the poor countries, the vulnerable countries, you really need to change the way people operate. For instance, the lack of access to energy is one of the key causes of destruction of the environment in all those countries.
Absolutely, but if I can almost ask the same question to you, Mike, if you managed to get rid of these subsidies, would that change the environment dramatically for the kinds of things that you would finance? Because there's a lot of talk about green bonds, there's a lot of talk about pushing capital towards renewables, but would you have a bigger impact if you actually got rid of subsidies?
Well, I think one of the big things that would likely come out of it is today, what we see in the world in some ways is there's fear around this nexus of trade and climate. And what I mean by that is that while globalization has been great and trade has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, there's the other side of that around the protectionism of people having lost jobs. And I think as people then conflate climate into that and subsidies into that, I fear that people pull back and move slower at those than they otherwise would. So one, I think it would be great to do that, and I think we would see some shifts, right? Because again, you just look at what's going on between the US and China. We've seen trade routes realign, manufacturing realign very quickly. So I think as subsidies went, prices changed, you would see manufacturers, you'd see demanders of goods and services realigning against that quickly.
Are you going to be pushing for that as part of your focus on, greener, the financial sector's role in assisting efforts to combat climate change? Will you be loudly pushing for reduced subsidies for fossil fuels?
Go on.
Short answer, yes, but not loudly, but pushing, yes. Because we tend to think that, anyway, lobbying and pushing is more effective if it's done not too loud a manner. And that's what we do with the companies we finance. We engage constructively with them to get them to change, and we find that more effective often than noise.
I wanted to turn, because we've got very little time left, to another not uncontroversial subject, which is the use of carbon tariffs. Because we're in a world now where people seem to think it's okay to slap tariffs on everything. So the European Union, I know, is with the new president of the European Commission, climate is very high on the agenda. And there are increasing calls for, well, maybe we have to introduce carbon adjustment tariffs in the European Union. If other people aren't going to pull their weight and we're going to do more, then let's introduce those. Do you think that's likely to happen, Commissioner? And would it be a good thing for the global trading system?
It would certainly be a good thing to do so. And the more countries who who's involved in this, the better, of course. So we would seek to broadly cooperate. Exactly how to do it is, of course, still not clear. The new incoming president of the European Commission, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, has been very clear that she wants to do this. And I know that there are lots of good brains all over the European Union working on trying to find ways to do it that is not discriminatory and that really serves its purpose. Maybe you can start lightly with a few sectors and then build from that. But exactly how to do it, I think we still need some talks. I know there are discussions in other countries as well, New Zealand, I think, and Canada, and within the OECD there are discussions. So if we can do a broad initiative there, I think it would be really, really good for the climate. But probably you have to start a little bit sooner.
Prime Minister, what's your view, both of the likelihood and also the politics? I mean, the WTO is already under huge strain. Yeah. If you suddenly have the Europeans saying we're going to introduce carbon tariffs.
Well, it has to be in compliance with WTO rules, of course. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not.
Would the US not just leave?
Yeah, and I think, you know, you've already raised the complexity with taking that as an option. There'd be definitional issues, there'd be issues around how it was constructed and maintained. I think actually, if we're looking for speed, which is ultimately what we need in this climate crisis, then let's use some of the tools we already have. If we were all using some domestic and appropriate form of carbon pricing, including, for instance, in New Zealand, we have an emissions trading scheme. If we were all adopting an approach like that, then we would be, I think, removing some of the disparity that exists between us. And this is a huge issue domestically. How do I convince different industries in New Zealand that it's important for us to have a comprehensive emissions trading scheme and carbon pricing if they look at their international competitors and see that that's not applying elsewhere? So that is a mechanism that already exists that we should have an expectation is being applied domestically. And on the flip side, tools and devices like, for instance, removing tariffs to incentivize the trade of goods and services that are basically good for the planet and green technology is another way that we can enhance the trade and production of those technologies.
Do any of you have any expectation that this can happen at a multilateral level? That we can actually see progress at the WTO, or is this going to be enlightened countries?
Perhaps one of the reasons we're creating a device that you know, we are seeking other countries to sign on to, but we've started small and we will grow that device, is because obviously, although ultimately we are working very hard to try and support, uphold and maintain the WTO as an institution, we also operate in reality right now. We've got to keep moving in spite of that.
Those two are not necessarily easy to do in tandem. Mike, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think we've seen in the numbers that have been talked about this week and before that we probably need to take more radical action than that. I'm a big believer in a combination of the stick and the carrot. And I think in many ways, it's the carrot that's got the ability to get us there. We have got to start thinking outside the box and incentivizing people. So I don't just like having the stick, because I think the stick leads to a rationality of behavior. Fine, I can do that. I'll pay for that. I'll factor that in. My economics will cover that. We need to change the paradigm, and we've got to incentivize people to innovate so that we really bend the curve.
Absolutely, and that's extremely important, but who is the we in this? I mean, we have two members, extremely esteemed members of the private sector, two government representatives. Is this a public-private partnership? Is it the public sector? Is it the private sector? Because
yes.
Both.
Okay, well, let's put some pressure on that.
It's all of it. It's got to be.
Has to be.
You know, when you think about where we are today, you think about what's going on, in many ways, I would describe the way we're going that in different directions. I would argue that the business leaders that I meet with, Citi's approach, certain Tijan's approach, is it's the tone from the top, and we're driving it, and we're putting pronouncements, and we're putting markers out there. And the rest of the organization follows us. I would argue from the public sector is kind of coming at this from a groundswell perspective, or more as a groundswell perspective, and the leaders are kind of coming after and understanding that. And you can see in the numbers here this week of, you know, we don't have unanimity amongst big parts of governments in terms of the direction we're headed. I think if you get business in a room, you would find much closer alignment. And I think the tone from the top of saying, we're going to take this, we don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but we're going to figure it out.
I think really at the top, both in the private and the public sector, you get the awareness and the desire move in that direction. And one thing that's clear is the clients. When I think about our clients who in the end drive your business, drive my business, most of them are global. They are multi-region, multi-trade regions, if you wish, and they think about the world as one place. And as we accompany them, we invest with them, I think things will get better. But absolutely, those partnerships are essential to have, if you wish, the right conditions for the world economy to thrive. I think there's no other option.
So all of that is very upbeat, and I hope you do all get together and do that. But one concern is, are you running out of time in the court of public opinion? Because if you see the people who have the energy, who are bringing the focus on the need to act on the climate, they do think that trade is a bad idea and that it is bad for the climate. And how do you change that narrative? How do you bring these two together so that the climate activists don't think that it's a bad thing? Commissioner.
Well, we have actually tried to engage with them in the European Union, with the climate activists, with environmental organizations, consumer organizations, trade unions, others who might have critical views on that. Try to listen to them, to engage them in the negotiations, take their advice and make them a sort of permanent advisory group to what we do in trade negotiations. Open up so they can see what we're doing, but also listening to their advice and knowledge and see how we can include that in our trade agreements. Trade cannot solve all the problems of the world, but it can be a factor if it's well done. And trade is also about trading environmentally friendly goods, and that I fully agree that should be much cheaper and easier. It's also about changing ideas and innovation and pooling resources when it comes to research and new technologies. Right. And isolating and closing the doors will definitely not help the climate.
Prime Minister?
No, please.
Yeah, time is running out in the court of public opinion because time is running out for us to address climate change. So I think it's right that they hold our feet to the fire. But on trade, actually, one of the issues we've had is that it's become really a tool for blame. Actually, we have to start taking some domestic ownership. If the trade agreements were not delivering greater equality, greater reduction of the income divide between the well-off and the poor in our countries, our own domestic policies have to answer that question as well. And the same, I would say, for environmental policy. Trade cannot carry the brunt of the blame, but it can actually provide some of the answers. We have to negotiate, though, agreements that are gold standard agreements, and we're looking to do that between New Zealand and the EU and the FTA we're currently trying to negotiate. The more that we do that, the more we will bring people with us, but it should never, ever be used as a tool for blame. We have to take some ownership.
We have very little time.
Very important point on that. I think it's vital to acknowledge the negative effects of trade. Too often people like us who are pro-trade say, well, the benefits outweigh the downsides. That's not sufficient as an answer, and that's what the activists are saying. We need to have explicit answers to the negative effects, not just saying that the positive effects outweigh them. And I think that's really a central point.
I had plenty of other questions, but we are running out of time. Thank you. That was incredibly a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Special Representative on Climate Change Affairs of China, His Excellency Minister Xie Zhanhua, Chairman of the Paulson Institute and former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Honorable Secretary Hank Paulson, and co-founder and co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group and host of the David Rubenstein Show Peer-to-Peer Conversations, David Rubenstein.
Secretary Paulson, most former secretaries of Treasury, when they leave the job as Secretary of Treasury, they go back into the finance world, or they go into it if they hadn't already been into it, or the investment world, the money-making world. You have chosen not to do that. You've chosen to go into the nonprofit world, particularly in terms of environmental protection. Why are you not in the investment world, and why are you so committed to global climate change issues and environmental protection?
Well, David, first of all, I look at climate change as a huge economic issue. It is by far the most formidable, catastrophic, absolutely certain risk that to our, our economic security and our social security and our social stability. And the reason why I go to China so much, and the reason why the Paulson Institute is focused on China, is this relationship is incredibly important, the U.S.-China relationship. And China's leadership on climate change is absolutely essential, because just the math, China is so big, and its emissions are double that of the U.S. and Europe combined. So if China doesn't succeed, we've got very little chance of meeting of really mitigating these long-term risks.
Okay, so making money is less important to you than global climate change, I assume.
Of course.
And you've been to China in your life more than 150 times?
Yes.
Okay, and you learned Mandarin yet?
Nope,
Not
I'm
yet.
a slow learner.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. You've been involved in climate change issues for 30 years, is that right?
Yes, very long time.
And you were here at the climate change summit that the UN held, and did anything get accomplished there of note?
I have been to the UN negotiation for 13 years, but then the major achievement was actually the Paris Protocol, and so that we hope that globally that we can achieve on certain goals for the climate change, and we establish a certain framework for it.
Okay. For both of you, generally there's a presumption that the greater economic growth, the worse it might be for the economy. Is it your view, Secretary Paulson, that if economy grows at a very high percentage, it necessarily means there's going to be more emissions, and that's not a good thing?
Obviously, you want less emissions, but the biggest issue we're facing today is really weak growth. And in times when there are weak economies, often what you see is the environment gets shortchanged. And that is something that is really very perverse, because what it does is it increases the economic burdens in the short term and leads to real significant problems.
Well, let's suppose I'm an investor and I care less about climate change than maybe you do, but I want to invest in climate change things so I can want to make a lot of money. So are there good things in which I can invest that are going to help the climate but also make me a high rate of return?
Oh, there are many things, and David, even in the short term, particularly for an economy like China's, where there's great room for energy efficiency, there are some immediate opportunities to realize very big savings by investing in technologies to conserve energy. Some real opportunities. We've seen I've looked at studies which show that the environmental opportunity in terms of the size of the market in China is a $1 trillion opportunity in terms of environmental goods and services. And I would echo something that the last panelist said, which I think is very important. When I was Treasury Secretary, I pushed very hard to eliminate the tariffs on environmental goods and services. And this would be a win for the economy, a win for the environment, and it's something both of our countries should work on together.
Is China meeting its requirements under the Paris Climate Change Accord?
In fact, I think the climate change and the economic change, I think that we cannot deal with that to achieve the Paris Protocol with the traditional technology. We need to have innovation, a lot of innovation, so that we can achieve the goal, and also that to improve the people's livelihood in China. So I can give you a number in China. China from 2005 to 2018,
单位 GDP 的二氧化碳的排放降低了
the CO2 emissions
但是我们的
per
经济呢
unit of
增长了
GDP
3倍
actually has
我们减少了
declined
2.7万
40%
人
to
的
45%.
贫困。
But the thing is that
而
we
且呢
have lived
我们
the
通过这个节
millions
约
of
能
tens of
源
millions of
提高
people
能源的
out
利
of
用效
poverty.
率我
And
们
then
减少了
also
能
that
耗
we have
这个已经是
we have
28亿
reduced
吨
the
而且
energy
呢我们
consumption
减少了
of the
二氧化碳的排放
2.8
这个增加了这个
million tons.
3000
So
年
that
产
we
值
also
3000多万的年产值3万的节能环保产业，增加了3000多万人的就
We
业。
have also that increased a lot of GTB, so it is a very wonderful achievement.
Is China's main focus on reducing its emissions or in getting other countries to reduce their emissions? In other words, your position is to focus on other countries' emissions or China's emissions, and you think China is making real progress in reducing its emissions?
我们还是要首先把自己的
But
事
of
情
course,
做好。
we need to deal with
所以
our
我
own
们确
affairs
定了
first.
中国应对
Last
气候
year
变化的
that
目
we
标。
have
我
already
们现在
ratified
2020
our
年
aim.
确定的目
Last
标，
year
我们已经
that
提前2
in
年实现了。我们现在
2030that
进一步的来转变我
we
们的
need
发
to
展方式，
increase
要走绿色、低碳、
reduction
循环发
of
展的
the
道路。最后
emission
呢，
per
我们
unit
追
of
求
our
的目标
GDP
是
to
应对气
60
候变
to
化的目标实现
65%.
了，我
And
们
then
经济
we
发展
have
的目标
achieved
实
our
现了
goal, then of
这
course
个
that we
环
can
境质量的改
realize
善
and
也要
our
实现。
economic
另外呢，
growth,
人民的生活水平也
our
要提
purpose,
高。
and then people's livelihood would generally grow, and that is our general purpose.
Hank, you've been an advocate for China to use and other countries to use green bonds and green finance. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, so let me talk about China and their goals,
okay,
as I see it, because I think this is very important. I think they've made amazing progress in dealing with the immediate, very visible priorities of cleaning up the air, water, and soil. So that is huge. I think it's really important that they not let up on their efforts to reduce emissions. And so what we've seen is emissions declined in 2014 to 2016. In 2018, they grew at 2.3%. They grew at 2017. So I think continuing the focus, not just on the environmental issues, but on reducing carbon emissions is very important. Now, in terms of green bonds, I think it's pretty impressive because what you've seen is this effort to clean up the environment is one of President Xi's top 3 priorities. And so he's put a big push behind it. It costs $1 trillion a year in China. The government can put in 15%. So they need to create vehicles to attract private capital. And they've done a really good job there. Green bonds is an example. They're the second largest issuer of green bonds. Now,
First, explain what a green bond is for those who don't know.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, it gets to the next question. A green bond, we don't have a good definition of green bonds. Green bonds are bonds that are used to clean up the environment, to change to a cleaner economy. But for instance, there's no universal definition. And right now, China even classifies some coal plants, clean coal plants, as green bonds. Now they're rethinking that, and I think that's a very good thing. Another way where green bonds is very important is, first of all, China has introduced a number of really exciting financing mechanisms, green financing mechanisms, some involving fintech. So this is a really fertile area. And the thing that I'm focused on right now is President Xi Jinping has said that the Belt and Road needs to have a big green focus. Okay. And the Paulson Institute has worked on developing some principles for financial institutions there. And the reason I emphasize that is because China is the largest, Chinese enterprises are the largest builders of coal plants on the Belt and Road. They finance about 25% of those coal plants. So having really strong standards can make a very big difference because if you look out a few years, the 126 countries on the Belt and Roads will emit as much carbon as China.
Well, technically, the United States is still a member of the Paris Accord. How are we doing on our emission standards?
Well, I've got to tell you something. Our emissions have been declining pretty nicely in many areas, just because of things that have been done at the subnational level with cities, with companies, in terms of energy efficiency. But I've got to tell you something. Unless the U.S. leads in this area, it's going to be very hard to get other countries to do their part.
In China right now, the main decision maker on climate change, is that Xi Jinping? Is it the Politburo? Is it you? Who actually makes the decisions about what China can do?
In China, it's because climate change. We have established two task forces, and then our chairman was the chairman of these two committees. And then also that we have many members, and in these two committees, we have a decision-making mechanism, and then we have decided in 2030 aim for our climate change. We need to estimate that need to invest the 4.2 trillion of RMB to actually, and then we can increase and 69 million, we have 6,100 employment opportunities, and so that with this aim, a lot of the entrepreneurs will know where the opportunities lie, and so that they can invest in adhere to this goal. It is important to have such a goal.
相配套的这个经济政策，比如说税收啊、价格呀、财政啊、金融啊这方面的政策必须要有，要明确我鼓励什么、限制什么、禁止什么。所以现在刚才鲍尔森先生讲了，中国的绿色金融，我们现在大体上已经有了8万亿人民币的这个绿色债券来绿色金融来支持应对气候变化的行动。
Wouldn't it be easier just to let Hank Paulson decide what China's emissions policy should be? Wouldn't he be better than anybody else you have? No? All right. I think we're out of time, but thank you both for a very interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Francine Lacroix with stories of people and places working to create stability in an uncertain world. Here is the news of our time. It's morning in New York City at the 2019 Bloomberg Global Business Forum. Leaders of government, business, and philanthropy have gathered to discuss and solve today's complex challenges. And while we're here, it's afternoon in the Sahara Desert, where Morocco is trailblazing the future of renewable solar energy. Mustafa, can you tell us more?
The whole solar complex Noor Warzazat is saving 1 million tons of dioxide of carbon annually. By doing so, Morocco is contributing in the reduction of the greenhouse gas and saving the environment.
Thank you. Meanwhile, while we're here, strategically placed herds of goats are helping prevent devastating wildfires in Portugal by eating dry grasses and forest underbrush. And at the same moment, an organization is revolutionizing the way we reduce food waste just by using a social media app. Ellis, can you actually introduce yourself?
My name is Ellis and I'm the Market Growth Manager at Olio. I'm in Stockholm, Sweden, and today I'm collecting unsold food from Fotografiska Café to share with the local community via the Olio app to avoid food waste.
Fantastic. And while we're here, kitchens preparing for the dinner rush in Dubai are using a brand new trash can which uses AI to identify and reuse food scraps, shifting the way restaurants handle food waste. And under the Indonesian moon, a new way to produce biofuel is actually buzzing at Biteback. Moshab, can you explain what Biteback does?
Biteback is an insect biorefining company. We are aiming to reduce our dependency towards palm oil by creating a nutrient-dense, more sustainable alternative made of edible insects.
Well done, Mushab. And while we're here, in the dark of night, organizations like the Wilderness Society of Australia are protecting habitat to save endangered animals. And as the sun rises in San Francisco, a startup is creating quality building blocks for sustainable supply chains. Miranda, what's happening where you are?
I'm here at the Bioselection Lab. Here at this location, we're developing a chemical innovation to turn unrecyclable plastics into valuable chemicals and novel materials for advanced manufacturing.
Thank you, Miranda. And while we're here, AMP Robotics in Colorado is employing the latest in robotics to bring new levels of efficiency, sorting recyclable trash, and a research vessel in Peru is working to establish internationally recognized reserves for ocean wildlife. Hello, Hector. Where are you this morning?
We are sitting on board the research vessel Carrasco. This ship is one of the most advanced ships for research in order to preserve the ecosystems of the Peruvian Ocean.
Spectacular work, Hector. So much going on every minute of every day. Challenges grow, work continues, progress is being made. It's 11:04 in New York City. This has been Francine Lacqua at the Bloomberg Global Business Forum with amazing news of what's happening while we're here. And that concludes our program. Thank you all for coming, and you may now proceed to your breakout sessions.